A journey into the heart of ancient Greek legends and timeless stories is about to unfold. These are not merely narratives, they are whispers from millennia past, transmitted through countless generations, akin to tender lullabies echoing through time. This exploration will diverge from the boisterous, conflict-ridden renditions often encountered. Instead, it promises a delve into the subtle nuances, the gentle intricacies, and the tranquil interludes nestled between the grand, pivotal events. Prepare to traverse ancient, hidden grottos and to perceive the soft, almost inaudible conversations that transpired between gods and mortals. As the world outside begins to recede, a passage into the somnolent realm of Greek mythology commences. Envision a peregrination through the most profound stillness imaginable, a hush so absolute that even the most intimate sounds seemed muted. This is the very threshold being approached, the concealed cave of Hypnos, the gentle god of sleep himself. While the modern mind may rarely personify the act of slumber, the ancient Greeks harbored a deeper wisdom. They recognized that a force as potent as sleep, one capable of leveling the playing field between monarchs and paupers, or halting the most formidable combatant mid-onslaught, could not simply be an abstract sensation. It had to be an entity, a divine being. That entity was Hypnos. His sacred grotto lay at the fringe of existence, a place where daylight surrendered its glow to the encroaching dusk, a seamless blend reminiscent of honey yielding to warm milk. The portal remained untouched by the sun's illuminating rays, and no strident clamor had ever reverberated off its moss-clad walls. Ancient lore dictated that one could discover it by following the mythical river Lethe, the very current of oblivion, until its waters meandered with such languor they appeared almost stagnant. As one draws near this hallowed sanctuary, footsteps naturally soften, as if compelled by an unseen force. The atmosphere itself felt laden with somnolence, like traversing imperceptible drapes of gossamer silk. Here poppies grew in wild abundance, not the vibrant crimson varieties, but ethereal, pallid blossoms that swayed their weighty crowns in an imperceptible zephyr. The cavern's maw opened invitingly, not sharp and menacing like a mythical beast's maw, but rounded and gentle, a threshold rendered silken by the passage of innumerable epochs. Velvety moss cushioned every surface, and minute aqueous pearls descended with such infrequency that each soft plink resonated like a far-off chime from an unseen shrine. Within, the cave stretched beyond the reach of visual perception. This was not due to its physical length, but rather because gazing into its depths induced a delightful lassitude in one's eyelids. The cavern's contours undulated with an inherent grace, seeming to inhale and exhale in perfect synchronicity with one's own pulse. And there, in the very core of this peaceful expanse, reposed Hypnos himself. Yet this tranquil scene held a captivating detail that beckoned further inquiry. Hypnos was not solitary within his grotto. Scattered around him, much like children who had succumbed to slumber during a bedtime tale, were his 1,000 sons, his myriad offspring. Each represented a distinct manifestation of the dream state. There was Morpheus, renowned for his ability to assume any human guise in dreams, and especially adept at manifesting as cherished individuals residing in distant lands. Beside him rested Iceless, who mastered the realm of animalistic visions, capable of conjuring dreams of soaring with eagles or racing alongside wolves through moonlit forests. And then there was Phantassos, the most enigmatic of all, who populated the subconscious landscape with chimerical constructs, impossible entities that, within the dream's logic, possessed an undeniable coherence until the dawn of waking reality. But a surprising truth lay beneath the surface. Though Hypnos was the divine embodiment of sleep, he did not perpetually slumber himself. Occasionally, when the cave attained its zenith of tranquility, he would slowly rouse and dedicate himself to cultivating his ethereal poppy garden. He would glide with an aquatic grace, every gesture flowing seamlessly into the next, eschewing any abrupt motion that could rupture the sublime stillness. His garden was a marvel unlike any other. The poppies here grew in neat, somnolent formations, and when their delicate petals, upon release, did not perish but merely softened, drifting earthward like downy plumes from a languid pillow fight. Hypnos would collect these petals in a receptacle intricately woven from the very fabric of dreams, safeguarding them for nights when the world above was too clamorous, too fraught with anxiety, too burdened by worry to embrace natural repose. Indeed, Hypnos's divine mandate was far more profound than commonly acknowledged. It transcended the mere induction of fatigue. It was about bestowing upon humanity genuine repose, a profound restoration capable of mending both corporeal and mental faculties. Every evening, as the sun began its descent in the mortal realm, he would prepare for his sacred work, like a master artisan meticulously readying their instruments. From his basket of dream petals, he would discern the ideal choices for each individual who yearned for sleep. For an anxious matriarch, he might select petals imbued with visions of her children, safe and joyful. For an elderly individual yearning for bygone days, petals carrying tender memories of summer afternoons that seemed to stretch into eternity. For a youngster apprehensive of the shadows, petals that painted dreams in soft, golden light. Yet the most extraordinary aspect of Hypnos, one that even the other Olympian deities found impressive, was his singular ability to induce slumber in none other than Zeus himself. Yes, Zeus, the formidable sovereign of Olympus, wielder of thunderbolts and master of the celestial expanse, would succumb to a profound languor when Hypnos deemed it time. This remarkable feat occurred twice in the ancient narratives. Both instances were at the behest of Hera, Zeus's divine consort. Hera, it is known, often found herself at odds with her husband's decrees, but direct contention with the king of the gods carried considerable peril. Thus she would journey to Hypnos's tranquil grotto, and with utmost deference, inquire if he might be persuaded to induce a brief slumber in the mighty Zeus. The inaugural occasion filled Hypnos with apprehension. Causing Zeus to fall asleep without explicit permission seemed like the kind of transgression that could incite severe divine retribution. However, Hera pledged to bestow upon him one of the graces as a wife, a boon too magnificent to decline. So Hypnos ascended to the lofty heights of Mount Olympus, traversing its resplendent marble corridors with the ethereal grace of a wisp of mist, and delicately imbued the sovereign of deities with the essence of slumber. Zeus succumbed to such a profound unconsciousness that he remained oblivious to Hera's subsequent actions, a fortunate circumstance indeed. When he awoke and grasped the situation, he was incensed. He scoured the cosmos for Hypnos, ready to inflict a grievous penalty. But here lay the ingenious maneuver. Hypnos had already returned to his cave and sought refuge within the protective embrace of his primordial mother, Nyx. the venerable goddess of night. Even Zeus held Nyx in awe. The primordial night predated the Olympian pantheon, embodying a force more elemental than their decrees or their ire. Thus, when Zeus discovered Hypnos protected by the very darkness itself, he had no choice but to recede. Hypnos was safe, nestled securely within the enveloping shadows, much like an infant seeking solace beneath blankets during a tempest. When Hera approached him for assistance a second time, Hypnos was quite justifiably hesitant. "Remember what transpired last time," he gently reminded her. But Hera's resolve was unwavering, and this time she presented an even more magnificent offering, an indestructible golden throne accompanied by a footstool meticulously forged by the divine smith Hephaestus himself. These artifacts of unparalleled beauty were said to imbue any occupant, whether deity or mortal, with a profound sense of tranquility. So once again, Hypnos made his stealthy pilgrimage to Olympus. This time he exercised heightened caution. He metamorphosed into a diminutive avian form, alighting upon a pine bough directly outside Zeus's chambers. From that vantage point, he intoned the most tender of lullabies ever conceived, a melody woven from ethereal sighs and the softest of zephyrs. Zeus's eyelids grew heavy, his formidable head bowed gently, and soon he was immersed in a slumber of unparalleled serenity. The true profundity of this narrative transcends Hera's machinations, or Zeus's temporary deception. It underscores the profound and undeniable potency of true repose. Even the most formidable entity in the cosmos required sleep. Even a deity capable of commanding both celestial lightning and terrestrial tremors had to ultimately yield to the subtle, persuasive influence of Hypnos. Back within his cave, Hypnos would sometimes contemplate these significant episodes as he nurtured his perpetual botanical haven. The other gods had their sagas replete with epic conflicts, perilous expeditions, passionate dalliances, and dire retributions. But Hypnos possessed something entirely distinct. He wielded the singular ability to bestow tranquility upon any individual, irrespective of location or temporal constraints. His cave remained a sanctum beyond the grasp of linear time, where anxieties dissipated like granules of sugar in warm water, and tribulations receded into distant, diminished concerns. Mortals who were fortuitous enough to stumble upon this hidden grotto, and there were a select few, typically individuals who had become disoriented within verdant woodlands, or had journeyed too deeply into the labyrinthine corridors of their own minds, described it as the epitome of restorative sanctuary they had ever encountered. They spoke of how the velvety moss offered a cushion more luxurious than any royal divan, how the atmosphere carried the subtle essence of lavender and the invigorating scent of recent rainfall, and how the mere act of respiration within its confines induced an immediate relaxation of the shoulders and a profound stillness of thought. Some even claimed that spending just 1 hour in Hypnos's cave equaled or surpassed the restorative benefits of an entire week of conventional slumber. And the dreams that came to visitors there were of an unparalleled nature. They were not the disjointed, perplexing visions characteristic of mundane slumber, but limpid, tender narratives that appeared meticulously crafted for each individual. Dreams of gliding effortlessly above tranquil oceans, dreams of intimate dialogues with cherished departed souls, dreams of strolling through enchanted gardens where each blossom resonated with a melodious, harmonious chorus. As the exploration of this tranquil subterranean chamber concludes, one might ponder a particular enigma In a cosmos teeming with deities who frequently demanded fervent adoration and substantial oblations, who were prone to outbursts of rage and the instigation of conflicts, why did Hypnos, the personification of sleep, seem content to merely reside in his secluded grotto, seeking nothing more than the opportunity to bestow repose upon the world? Perhaps his serene disposition stemmed from an inherent comprehension that eluded his more boisterous counterparts. He might have grasped that at times, the most profound act of power lies not in overt intervention, but in a quiet, unwavering presence, in the unconditional offering of solace, and in gently reminding all beings, both divine and mortal, that amidst the most bustling and tumultuous existences, an sanctuary for peace invariably awaits. And perhaps, just perhaps, this profound insight is a wisdom we could all embrace as we retreat into our own moments of quietude this evening, contemplating the visions that might grace our gentle slumber, and listening intently for the ancient narratives that sleep itself might impart. Should we attune ourselves to its soft, whispered sagacity? That elusive sensation one experiences upon waking from a dream, a vivid landscape that felt undeniably authentic, yet whose intricate details persistently slip from memory, much like attempting to grasp flowing water within cupped hands. That is precisely the sentiment many individuals encounter when they first encounter the legend of Atlantis. Yet, tonight, let us embark on a deliberate journey through the annals of this mythical island. Our focus will not be on its dramatic submersion beneath the relentless waves, but rather on its existence during its unassuming daily routines, long before the impending catastrophe, before the calamitous conclusion that remains etched in collective memory. The narrative of Atlantis originates from the writings of Plato, a preeminent Greek philosopher who flourished approximately 2,400 years ago. He presented this account not strictly as a piece of traditional mythology, but rather as an intricate intellectual exercise, elegantly veiled within an ancient fable. One might envision him seated beneath the dappled shade of an olive tree, engaging his pupils in a discourse concerning the quintessential attributes of ideal societies and the inherent perils associated with the accumulation of excessive authority. The gentle afternoon light would have filtered through the verdant foliage, and in the nearby vicinity, a fountain's soft gurgle would have provided a soothing counterpoint as he meticulously wove his captivating tale. However, let us momentarily depart from the confines of the philosophical academy and instead envision ourselves traversing the authentic thoroughfares of Atlantis on an ordinary Tuesday morning. On such a day, nothing of particular dramatic import was unfolding. The inhabitants were simply engaged in their customary daily routines. The sun cast a pleasant warmth, yet it was not oppressively hot. A delicate breeze carried with it the mingled fragrances of blossoming flowers and the bracing scent of salt water. And somewhere in the tranquil distance, the joyous peals of children's laughter would have drifted on the air as they engaged in their innocent play. The initial characteristic one would invariably observe about Atlantis was the meticulous precision with which every element had been arranged. The entirety of the island had been constructed in a series of flawless concentric circles, appearing as if a target had been drawn by an entity possessing infinite patience and unwavering skill. At the precise epicenter stood the magnificent royal palace, which was encircled by a ring of land, followed by a ring of water, then another ring of land, and so forth, extending outwards all the way to the bustling harbor. In this harbor, vessels from various corners of the globe gently swayed with the morning breeze. These were not merely arbitrary circles, however. Each distinct ring was interconnected with the others by an ingenious network of bridges and subterranean tunnels, meticulously carved from both ebony and alabaster stone. These structures, when observed from the elevated hills encircling the city, created patterns resembling colossal checkerboards. The tunnels themselves were of considerable width, ample enough for two ships to navigate past each other with ease, and their surfaces were adorned with polished brass, which shimmered with a golden luster under the afternoon sun. As one perambulated through the outermost ring in the early hours of the morning, they would encounter fishermen methodically preparing their nets. Their movements were slow and deliberate, indicative of individuals whose families had performed this same occupation for countless generations. Their maritime vessels were utterly distinct from any others found in the ancient world, crafted from a unique timber that flourished exclusively on Atlantis, a wood naturally imbued with a remarkable resistance to saline water, and which seemed impervious to decay or splintering. These fishermen would offer a courteous nod as visitors passed, yet they displayed no discernible awe or particular interest in the presence of strangers. After all, when one resides within the most technologically advanced and sophisticated civilization on Earth, visitors from distant lands often appeared somewhat rudimentary, not in a malicious sense, but rather in the same manner one might regard an individual laboriously performing calculations with an abacus when a modern calculator is readily available. Their self-assurance was quiet and deeply ingrained, characteristic of people who had never experienced the anxieties of scarcity, whether concerning sustenance or secure lodging. Proceeding inwards towards the second concentric ring, one would traverse the first of these remarkable bridges and enter the vibrant merchant district, where the true marvel of Atlantean ingenuity became strikingly apparent. Here lies a fascinating revelation. The Atlanteans had successfully resolved complex engineering and logistical challenges that would not be reconquered for several millennia by other civilizations. They possessed an intricate system of running water in every edifice, not solely for potable consumption, but also providing heated water for luxurious baths. Furthermore, they had established a highly efficient postal system capable of delivering messages to any quadrant of the island within a mere few hours. They even utilized a rudimentary form of elevators, employing a sophisticated arrangement of counterweights and pulleys that could effortlessly transport both individuals and commodities between various floors. But pause, for here is the aspect that would undoubtedly evoke profound astonishment. Despite this impressive array of technological advancements, the rhythm of daily existence in Atlantis unfolded at a surprisingly unhurried pace. People did not rush about with the frantic urgency of those perpetually bound for an important appointment. Instead, they ambled leisurely through the expansive thoroughfares, pausing to engage in convivial conversations with neighbors, to meticulously examine wares displayed in the bustling marketplace, or simply to recline on exquisitely carved benches and observe the world's gentle progression. This tranquil demeanor was attributable to the Atlanteans' profound discovery, an insight that contemporary societies are still striving to fully grasp, that both efficiency and serenity could coexist harmoniously. Their sophisticated systems did not precipitate a more frenetic lifestyle. Rather, they fostered a greater sense of relaxation. When one is liberated from the necessity of dedicating numerous hours each day to fundamental survival tasks, a wealth of time becomes available for contemplation, for creative pursuits, and simply for being wholly present within one's own life. Within the bustling marketplace of the second ring, vendors offered an extraordinary array of fruits that flourished exclusively on Atlantis, unknown in any other terrestrial location. There were apples that maintained their pristine freshness for months without succumbing to spoilage, grapes whose flavor subtly shifted depending on the precise hour of their consumption, and a distinctive variety of bread crafted from a unique grain cultivated underwater in the deliberately flooded fields surrounding the island. This bread possessed a subtly sweet, nutty essence and a texture so ethereal it seemed to dissipate upon the tongue like ephemeral sea foam. The Atlantean agriculturists had mastered the art of collaborating with the ocean's rhythms rather than contending against them. They had ingeniously devised a system of meticulously controlled flooding that not only enriched their fertile soil, but also yielded crops of unparalleled quality and prodigious quantity. During the annual harvest season, these fields would be carefully drained, and teams of diligent workers would wade through the nutrient-rich mud, assiduously gathering produce destined to sustain not only the Atlantean populace, but also a significant portion of the Mediterranean world. As one continued their inward journey towards the third concentric ring, they would inevitably traverse one of those truly remarkable bridges. The experience of crossing it felt akin to passing between two distinct realms. The crystalline waters below were so exceptionally clear that one could discern schools of fish swimming languidly, their iridescent scales catching the ambient light like scattered precious coins. The Atlanteans had selectively bred these aquatic creatures to possess an exceptional beauty and an inherently peaceful temperament, and the act of feeding them had evolved into a cherished pastime for both the young and the adult inhabitants alike. The third ring served as the vibrant hub for the island's skilled artisans and master craftsmen. It was here that the quintessential brilliance of Atlantean society became undeniably manifest. These individuals were not merely engaged in the production of utilitarian objects. They were, in essence, artists who happened to fashion useful items. A seemingly simple water pitcher, for instance, would be sculpted and adorned with such exquisite artistry that it could grace the display cases of a prestigious museum, yet it would simultaneously perform its practical function flawlessly, keeping water refreshingly cool even on the most scorching days. The metallurgists of Atlantis had either discovered or ingeniously created orichalcum, a rare and precious metal that existed nowhere else in the world. It was universally described as being almost as valuable as pure gold, yet possessed superior utility, greater strength than bronze, and a more captivating beauty than silver. Furthermore, it exhibited the unusual property of appearing to emanate its own soft, internal luminescence. They employed this extraordinary material not merely for decorative embellishment, but for essential practical applications such as water conduits and structural supports, imbuing the entire metropolis with a gentle, shimmering glow during the twilight hours. Here is an aspect of Atlantean society that might provoke considerable surprise. Despite their immense prosperity and advanced technological prowess, they were not consumed by an insatiable desire for luxury purely for its own sake. Instead, they seemed to possess a profound understanding that the most genuine form of luxury resided in having ample time and profound peace to savor life's simpler pleasures. Families would routinely spend entire afternoons within the serene confines of their gardens, not out of a laborious obligation to tend to the flora, but rather from a genuine desire to observe the natural progression of growth and life. As one progressed deeper into the inner rings, the majestic presence of the temples and schools began to emerge, signifying that Atlantis was not merely an advanced civilization, but also one imbued with profound wisdom. The Atlanteans revered Poseidon, the formidable god of the sea. However, their places of worship were not the somber, enigmatic structures one might anticipate. Instead, they were luminous, expansive edifices where seawater flowed through meticulously designed channels embedded within the flooring, generating a ceaseless, gentle murmur of moving water that seemed to effortlessly dissipate all anxieties and stresses. Their educational institutions were arguably even more impressive than their sacred temples. Children were instructed not merely in the acquisition of factual knowledge and practical proficiencies, but critically in the art of clear, logical thought and the principles of virtuous living. They diligently pursued studies in mathematics and engineering, certainly, but their curriculum also encompassed music and philosophy, agriculture and astronomy. The overarching objective was to cultivate individuals who could contribute meaningfully to society in a multitude of ways, individuals who possessed a holistic comprehension of how all the disparate components of civilization interconnected and functioned synergistically. However, it is at this juncture that the narrative assumes a subtly altered inflection, akin to the way a perfectly cloudless summer day can gradually become overcast. As the inexorable march of generations unfolded, a segment of the Atlantean populace began to take their flawless society for granted. The offspring who had matured amidst the conveniences of ubiquitous running water and highly efficient transportation, surrounded by an abundance of nourishing food and aesthetically pleasing architecture, gradually began to perceive this idyllic state as the inherent order of the world. They started to harbor the insidious belief that their unparalleled success stemmed from an intrinsic superiority over other peoples, rather than being the culmination of diligent effort, collaborative spirit, and fortuitous circumstances. Some individuals commenced to entertain the notion that if Atlantis was so demonstrably superior to all other regions, perhaps they ought to assume dominion over all other regions as well. This represented a gradual, almost imperceptible metamorphosis in their collective mindset, much like the slow, persistent accumulation of sand against a seawall, which, over time, subtly but irrevocably alters the very topography of the beach. Plato's narrative here transitions into a potent cautionary tale, illuminating the perils inherent in unchecked hubris and burgeoning ambition. The denizens of Atlantis, once renowned for their serene wisdom, began to cast their gaze outwards with intentions of territorial acquisition, gradually forsaking the very principles of peaceful coexistence that had originally underpinned their society's remarkable flourishing. They commenced the construction of formidable warships, abandoning the simpler fishing vessels of their past, and dedicated their efforts to training legions of soldiers instead of cultivating philosophers. Their societal value system shifted dramatically, now measuring their collective worth not by what they could innovatively create together, but by the spoils they could forcibly extract from others. This profound alteration in their collective ethos, as recounted by Plato, was not a sudden cataclysm but an insidious, incremental transformation. It unfolded subtly, much like a meticulously maintained garden gradually succumbs to neglect and becomes overgrown if left untended. Each successive generation proved itself marginally more belligerent than its predecessors. The following generation became even more deeply entrenched in a conviction of their intrinsic superiority. And the generation thereafter evolved to believe that seizing what they desired from other peoples was not merely permissible, but an unquestionable entitlement. The Olympian deities, most notably Zeus, observed this unfolding metamorphosis with mounting apprehension. The Atlanteans were evolving into a caricature of their intended form, colossal bullies, deploying their extraordinary endowments for malevolence rather than benevolence. It was akin to witnessing a cherished offspring mature into a cruel and self-absorbed individual, shattering the affections of all who had once harbored immense pride in their existence. Consequently, within the span of a single day and night, Atlantis was swallowed by the oceanic depths. This divine intervention, according to Plato, was not born of wrath, but rather a profound sorrow, much like the melancholic act of setting aside a once beautiful toy that has been irrevocably damaged. The terrestrial crust convulsed, the oceans surged, and the most advanced civilization humanity had ever known was obliterated, as if its existence had been merely an ephemeral dream. Yet a particularly compelling facet of this conclusion lies in its deeper meaning. Plato was not, in essence, recounting a simple chronicle of a vanished civilization. He was articulating a profound narrative about fundamental choices, illustrating how even the most exemplary society can be irrevocably undermined if its populace loses sight of the core virtues that initially propelled its greatness. The authentic Atlantis in Plato's philosophical construct was not a geographical coordinate on a map. It represented an aspirational concept of human societal potential, achievable when individuals collaborate with sagacity and equity. The true tragedy, therefore, was not its submersion beneath the waves, but its internal degeneration from an exquisite ideal into a grotesque shadow of its former self. The physical obliteration served merely as the palpable manifestation of a spiritual desolation that had already taken root. The Atlantis that descended into the ocean was, in essence, already defunct. What the sea ultimately claimed was but an empty husk of what had once been a paradise. As one contemplates the tranquil expanse where Atlantis once reputedly flourished, a compelling inquiry arises regarding the enduring lessons this ancient saga still imparts. In our contemporary era, equipped with technological marvels that would undoubtedly appear as pure magic to our ancient forebears, one must ponder whether these advancements are channeled towards fostering greater enlightenment and serenity, or towards propagating increased distraction and discord. Are we engaged in constructing metaphorical bridges between diverse peoples, or are we erecting insurmountable walls? And perhaps, within the gentle cadence of waves caressing distant coastlines, one might still discern an ethereal echo of what Atlantis could have epitomized. Not merely a lost utopia, but rather a poignant reminder that paradise is a perpetual endeavor, one that each generation must consciously elect to cultivate. Day by day, decision by decision, with the same meticulous diligence that the Atlanteans once applied to tending their underwater gardens, before they tragically forgot that the most invaluable treasures are those that cannot be forcibly seized. The narrative of Atlantis serves as a powerful reminder that even seemingly perfect constructs are susceptible to transformation. Intriguingly, change itself can occasionally embody perfection, even when its initial manifestations feel challenging. Indeed, the most significant transformations often unfold with such imperceptible slowness that their onset is barely registered. This subtle progression mirrors the advent of autumn, does it not? One awakens on a particular morning to a faint, novel coolness in the air that was absent the day before. The foliage has yet to display its vibrant seasonal palette. The summer blooms persist in their flourishing, yet an almost imperceptible shift has already occurred within the surrounding world. The ancient Greeks conceived a graceful explanation for this gradual seasonal metamorphosis. Their tale commences with a youthful goddess, engrossed in the simple pleasure of a serene afternoon spent in a meadow. This setting, while reminiscent of the meticulously cultivated gardens of Atlantis, was inherently wilder, more primal, brimming with the kind of untamed splendor that thrives independently of human design. Her name was Persephone, and she was the cherished daughter of Demeter, the revered goddess who presided over all verdant growth. Had one been granted the opportunity to behold Persephone on that fateful day, one would have observed her seamless integration into the natural realm surrounding her. When her laughter rippled forth, flowers seemed to unfurl their petals with enhanced brilliance. As she glided through the grasses, they appeared to deepen in emerald hue beneath her delicate tread. Her very presence exuded an animating quality, imbuing everything around her with a renewed sense of vitality and optimism. Demeter had nurtured her daughter within the sun-drenched expanse of the upper world, amid undulating hills and radiant meadows, deliberately shielding her from the more shadowed recesses of the mythological cosmos. It was a love characterized by meticulous protection, akin to cultivating a precious garden in the most sheltered locale imaginable, ensuring it receives optimal sunlight and hydration, yet is never exposed to excessive winds or chilling frosts. Demeter understood the vulnerability of beautiful things when prematurely exposed to undue peril. On this specific afternoon, Persephone was engaged in her most cherished pastime, meandering through a sun-drenched meadow and gathering an assortment of blossoms. These were no ordinary flowers, however. Each bloom she selected seemed to radiate a gentle, intrinsic luminescence, as if encapsulating a delicate spark of the sun itself. She moved with unhurried grace, choosing each blossom with meticulous discernment, much like a connoisseur selecting ingredients for an exceptional culinary creation, or an artist choosing pigments for a pivotal painting. The meadow through which she wandered was a sanctuary of profound tranquility, permeated by the soft, rhythmic hum of industrious bees and the distant, soothing murmur of a stream flowing over smoothed stones. Butterflies, resembling living jewels, danced in intricate patterns around her, and diminutive birds would occasionally alight upon her shoulder to serenade her with intimate melodies. It was a place where the very fabric of time seemed to behave differently, where an hour could swiftly evaporate like a minute, or a minute could stretch into an eternity. Now, it is at this juncture that the narrative embarks upon an unforeseen trajectory, albeit not with the dramatic abruptness one might anticipate. As Persephone stooped to pluck a particularly exquisite narcissus flower, its pristine white petals encircling a golden core like a miniature sun ensnared in floral form, the ground beneath her feet began to subtly tremor. This initial vibration was exceedingly gentle, akin to distant thunder rumbling on the horizon, or the deep, resonant purr of an enormous feline slumbering far beneath the earth's surface. The ground then cleaved open, not with violent rupture, but rather with the graceful parting of theatrical curtains revealing a stage, or the slow, deliberate unfurling of a flower's petals to greet the morning sun. From this chasm emerged Hades, the formidable deity of the underworld, enthroned in a chariot drawn by obsidian steeds that moved like solidified shadows, their hooves making no discernible sound as they traversed the ground. It is a common inclination to perceive Hades as the antagonist in this ancient saga. However, such a characterization does not entirely capture his essence. He was not inherently malevolent. Rather, he was profoundly solitary. One might endeavor to imagine an eternity spent amidst the spectral presences of the deceased, never experiencing the warmth of sunlight, never hearing the resonance of laughter, never encountering the simple, profound joy of witnessing new life unfurl. His subterranean dominion was undeniably crucial and indispensable, yet it was also an existence of unbearable isolation. Hades had observed Persephone from afar for a considerable period, and he had become captivated by her vibrant life force, her inherent connection to existence and growth. However, as the sovereign of the departed, he possessed no comprehension of the delicate nuances of proper courtship. He was entirely unversed in the language of flowers, the conviviality of picnics, or the subtleties of gentle conversation. Consequently, he acted upon what appeared, to his isolated logic, as the most straightforward course of action. He simply conveyed her to his realm, presuming that she would, in time, grow to cherish it as profoundly as he did. The journey into the underworld was not the terrifying plummet one might readily conjure in imagination. Instead, it unfolded as a gradual descent, a slow sinking through successive strata of the earth, each layer progressively quieter and more dimly lit than the last. Persephone observed with profound astonishment as they passed through vast caverns adorned with luminescent crystals, navigated subterranean rivers that defied all logic by flowing upwards, and beheld gardens where ethereal silver blossoms bloomed in perpetual twilight. Meanwhile, in the verdant world above, Demeter began to register her daughter's prolonged absence. Initially, she harbored no real apprehension. Persephone frequently became so engrossed in the surrounding beauty while gathering flowers that she would lose all track of time, hours dissolving into what felt like mere minutes. However, as the hours stretched into days, Demeter's mild concern escalated into a frantic panic, which then deepened into a grief so profound that it began to exert a palpable influence upon the entirety of the world. It is crucial to understand that Demeter's sorrow was not merely the emotional distress experienced by mortals. When a goddess governing agriculture succumbs to grief, the very earth itself resonates with her anguish. Plants began to wilt and perish, not from the ravages of drought or disease, but from a profound cosmic heartbreak. The grains in the expansive fields withered, becoming brown and brittle. Fruit trees ceased their bountiful production. Even the verdant grass began to fade to a pallid, lifeless hue, reminiscent of aged photographs left exposed to the sun's relentless rays for too long. But here resides the fascinating core of this narrative. The transformative change did not materialize instantaneously. It was a gradual process, much like observing a photograph slowly losing its vibrancy under the sun's persistent glare. Farmers across the land began to notice that their crops were not flourishing with their usual vigor. Gardeners observed that their beloved flowers no longer possessed their accustomed brilliance. This was, in essence, the world's inaugural autumn, yet no one comprehended its true nature. For the concept of autumn had never before existed. The world had perpetually existed in a state of eternal spring until Demeter's heart was irrevocably shattered. In the shadowy realm beneath the earth, Persephone found herself immersed in a kingdom far removed from any earthly conception. It was not the dreaded abyssal chasm that the mortal imagination typically conjured. Instead, she encountered a vast and profoundly tranquil domain where gentle, pervasive shadows mingled with a soft, ethereal silver luminescence that seemed to emanate from every surface and from no discernible source simultaneously. Within this serene landscape, the spectral inhabitants of the deceased glided with an unburdened grace through meticulously cultivated gardens, adorned with blossoms of black roses and the luminous petals of silver lilies. Finally liberated from the burdensome terrestrial anxieties and sorrows that had once tethered them to their earthly existence. With an almost paternal pride, akin to one revealing a cherished, closely guarded secret, Hades meticulously unveiled every wonder of his domain to her. He guided her through the resplendent Elysian fields, a verdant paradise where the souls of valiant heroes and virtuous individuals found their eternal repose in a state of beatific tranquility. He then led her to enchanted pools, their surfaces mirroring the world above, where the departed could gaze upon the cherished visages of their loved ones still dwelling in the land of the living, thus maintaining a tender, enduring connection across the formidable chasm between mortality and the afterlife. He even introduced her to the formidable Cerberus, the colossal three-headed canine guardian of the underworld's formidable gates, who, to her astonishment, proved to be remarkably docile and affectionate once his true nature was perceived beyond his fearsome exterior. Yet despite the underworld's unique allure, a profound yearning for the sun-drenched world persisted within Persephone's heart. She longed for the invigorating caress of the wind tousling her hair and the joyous symphony of birdsong announcing the dawn. Most acutely, she yearned for the comforting presence of her mother, Demeter, and the vibrant, burgeoning world of growth above ground. The underworld, while possessing its own austere grandeur, embodied a beauty intrinsically linked to conclusions rather than new beginnings, to profound serenity rather than effervescent growth, to quiet contemplation rather than dynamic action. Hades, for his part, made every conceivable effort to fulfill the role of a gracious host and an attentive companion. He presented her with the most exquisite culinary offerings his subterranean kingdom could provide, the most opulent chambers, sumptuously adorned with silken draperies and shimmering precious stones, and the most breathtaking gardens, where silver and crystal flora sparkled under the perpetual twilight. However, a crucial, immutable truth governed the consumption of sustenance within the underworld. Once one partook of its food, an indissoluble bond was forged with that realm, a connection not easily severed. Persephone, acutely aware of this perilous enchantment, meticulously refrained from eating anything, her sustenance drawn from the lingering memory of golden sunlight and the fervent hope of an imminent return to her homeland. But after an extended period marked by Hades's gentle yet persistent entreaties, coupled with her own increasing physical weakness from prolonged fasting, she at last yielded, accepting a modest morsel, a mere 6 pomegranate seeds, barely more than a fleeting taste. These diminutive spheres glowed with the deep, lustrous hue of rubies and offered a concentrated sweetness on her tongue, an essence like summer itself distilled into its most potent and pure form. Meanwhile, on the surface world, the unfolding crisis escalated with alarming speed. The relentless, mournful autumn, a direct manifestation of Demeter's profound sorrow, threatened to plunge the entire world into an unending, desolate winter. Humanity faced an impending catastrophe of starvation as crops withered and the land lay barren. Animals, too, struggled desperately to forage for sufficient sustenance. Even the Olympian gods themselves began to express grave concern, recognizing that a world devoid of growth was inherently unsustainable, its very capacity for life jeopardized. The fundamental pillars of existence were visibly cracking under the immense burden of one mother's inconsolable grief. Finally, Zeus, the supreme sovereign of the Olympian pantheon, determined that direct intervention was no longer merely advisable, but absolutely imperative. He dispatched Hermes, the fleet-footed messenger god, to descend into the underworld and broker the terms of Persephone's repatriation. Hermes was uniquely suited for this delicate diplomatic mission, being one of the rare divine beings endowed with the ability to traverse freely between all the disparate cosmic realms. Furthermore, he possessed an unparalleled knack for devising ingenious solutions that could accommodate all parties involved, even when the circumstances appeared utterly intractable. The ensuing dialogue between Hermes and Hades unfolded, in all likelihood, with far greater civility and reasoned discourse than one might typically anticipate given the gravity of the situation. Hades was not inherently unreasonable, rather. His actions stemmed from a profound inexperience with the intricacies of relationships and a desperate, pervasive yearning for companionship. When Hermes eloquently elucidated the dire state of the upper world, emphasizing its slow demise without Persephone's presence and the catastrophic threat Demeter's unchecked grief posed to all terrestrial life, Hades began to grasp the far-reaching, unintended consequences of his impulsive abduction. He truly had harbored no malicious intent to inflict such widespread suffering. However, the predicament of the pomegranate seeds still loomed large. Because Persephone had partaken of the underworld's mystical sustenance, even in such a small quantity, she was now inextricably bound to that shadowy domain in a manner that could not be simply dismissed or reversed. Nevertheless, given the minimal number of seeds she had consumed, and crucially, because all involved parties shared an earnest desire to forge a resolution that would ultimately safeguard the entire world, they were able to meticulously craft a compromise. This intricate agreement meticulously satisfied the ancient, immutable laws governing the underworld, while simultaneously resolving the immediate existential crisis. Persephone would thus be obligated to spend 6 months of each year in the underworld alongside Hades, a single month for each of the 6 seeds she had tasted. For the remaining 6 months, she would joyfully return to the upper world, reunited with her beloved mother. While this arrangement was far from a perfect outcome for anyone involved, it represented a solution that every party could, with varying degrees of reluctance, accept. Sometimes, the most effective answers are not those that bring unadulterated joy to all, but rather those that distribute a manageable measure of dissatisfaction equally, allowing for continued existence and balance. And so, from that pivotal negotiation, the intricate pattern of the seasons was irrevocably born, establishing a magnificent cosmic rhythm that would thenceforth govern the ebb and flow of the world. When Persephone ascends to the upper world each nascent spring, Demeter's overwhelming exaltation causes the entire natural world to burst forth into vibrant bloom. The earth, roused from its deep winter slumber, awakens with renewed vigor. Delicate flowers courageously push through the thawing soil with an indomitable hope. Trees unfurl their tender new leaves, and the world is once again enveloped in a verdant tapestry of growth and life. It is as if the entire planet collectively draws a deep, restorative breath of profound relief. Throughout the glorious summer months, a period defined by the joyful reunion of Persephone and Demeter, every living thing on earth flourishes with unparalleled exuberance. It is a time characterized by boundless abundance and robust growth, marked by long, sun-drenched days and the bountiful fulfillment of the earth's inherent promise. Gardens overflow with a rich profusion of vegetables, orchards groan under the weighty burden of ripe, succulent fruit, and the entirety of the living world celebrates the triumphant return of the benevolent goddess, who orchestrates all forms of verdant growth. However, as the inexorable time draws near for Persephone to descend once more into the underworld, Demeter's heart begins to heavy with an impending sadness, and the world above commences its gentle, melancholic slide into the embrace of autumn. Leaves, as if mirroring the bittersweet emotions of impending separation, transform into a breathtaking palette of fiery reds, burnished golds, and deep russets. The harvests are diligently gathered and carefully stored, and the world instinctively prepares for the quiet, contemplative period of waiting that defines winter. Winter, consequently, transforms into a period of essential rest rather than absolute cessation, a time of serene anticipation rather than permanent ending. It is during these months that Persephone reigns as the venerable queen of the underworld, imbuing that quiet, shadowy realm with a measure of her inherent warmth and vitality, while the upper world slumbers in a state of dormancy, patiently awaiting her inevitable return. Even amidst the coldest, darkest depths of winter, there remains an unwavering promise that spring will, without fail, grace the world once more. The profound beauty embedded within this myth lies not only in its elegant explanation of the changing seasons, but also in its deeper elucidation of how change itself operates within the intricate tapestry of our lives. There are moments when we are compelled to sojourn in darker, more subdued spaces, not as a form of punitive suffering, but as an integral component of a grander, overarching cycle that encompasses both periods of vigorous growth and essential repose, moments of unbridled joy and quiet introspection, times of profound connection and necessary release. The ancient Greeks, with their profound understanding of the cosmos, recognized that perpetual summer is an impossibility, just as an endless spring cannot endure. Each distinct season bestows its own unique gifts, imparts its own invaluable lessons, and reveals its own particular kind of beauty. Winter cultivates resilience and steadfast endurance. Spring inspires renewal and unyielding hope. Summer celebrates abundance and the sweet taste of fulfillment. Autumn teaches the wisdom of letting go and the prudence of preparation. All these phases are indispensable. All possess inherent value. All are threads woven into the magnificent overarching pattern that renders life itself possible. And perhaps most significantly, this ancient myth subtly suggests that even the most arduous and unsettling transformations can ultimately lead to novel forms of profound understanding. Persephone, through her extraordinary experiences, evolved into more than merely the goddess of spring and burgeoning life. She also became the formidable queen of the underworld, a deity who intimately comprehended both the vibrant pulse of life and the solemn stillness of death, both the exhilaration of beginnings and the quiet dignity of endings. Her unique tenure in both realms bestowed upon her a wisdom and a depth of compassion that she could never have attained had she remained perpetually confined to the sun-drenched meadows of her idyllic childhood. As we individually settle into whatever season we currently find ourselves inhabiting, be it the literal season unfolding outside our windows or the metaphorical season of our own personal lives, we might recall Persephone's poignant narrative and discover solace in the reassuring knowledge that all seasons, even the most challenging ones, are part of an immutable, larger pattern. This cosmic design inherently encompasses both the pain of separation and the joy of reunion, both the finality of endings and the promise of new beginnings, both the necessary sadness of letting go and the inevitable, comforting joy of returning home again. Just as Persephone learned that some profound changes arise from love, even when they initially present as immensely difficult, there exist other tales of transformations born from a different kind of love, the sacrificial love that willingly risks everything for the welfare of others. Have you ever consciously undertaken an action you knew would inevitably lead to trouble, yet you proceeded nonetheless, driven by an unshakable conviction that it was the unequivocally right thing to do? That, precisely, is the caliber of decision that forges heroes and fundamentally reshapes the world. And it was precisely this momentous kind of decision that confronted Prometheus on a distant day, a time when the gods and humanity were still navigating the complex, often contentious process of learning how to coexist. Prometheus was a Titan, a being belonging to the formidable generation of divine entities that predated Zeus and his siblings. Yet, unlike many of his fellow Titans, Prometheus had made the momentous choice to align himself with Zeus during the cataclysmic war that raged between the old gods and the ascendant New Order. He was renowned throughout the cosmos for his unparalleled intellect and his uncanny ability to gaze far into the tapestry of the future. Indeed, his very name, Prometheus, literally translated to forethought, embodying the profound capacity to anticipate events and comprehend their potential repercussions long before they manifested. What profoundly distinguished Prometheus from the vast majority of the other Olympian deities was his deeply ingrained, genuine affection for humankind. While many gods viewed mortals as either convenient servants or amusing, inconsequential pets, Prometheus regarded humanity and perceived within them an immense, untapped potential. He observed their arduous struggle for survival in a world teeming with perilous beasts and subjected to the merciless caprices of harsh weather. And in doing so, he experienced an emotion rarely felt by the gods: profound sympathy. It was as if he possessed the unique insight to see not merely what humans were in their primitive state, but what they were destined to become. In those nascent days, human beings existed in a manner vastly different from their present-day existence. Their days were consumed by the arduous tasks of gathering wild berries and roots, hunting small creatures with rudimentary sharpened sticks, and huddling together for meager warmth and safety within the confines of caves once the sun dipped below the horizon. They possessed no tools of any sophistication, save for jagged rocks and broken tree branches. They had no means to cook their sustenance beyond simply laying it out under the sun's feeble rays. and when the unforgiving grip of winter descended, they could do little more than stoically endure the bitter cold, clinging to the desperate hope that they had managed to stockpile just enough food to survive until the eventual, life-affirming return of spring. The divine beings, in the interim, resided in unparalleled opulence upon the majestic heights of Mount Olympus, where an abundance of magnificent provisions guaranteed their existence was both effortless and supremely gratifying. They partook of ambrosia and nectar, substances whose flavors far surpassed any earthly delicacy known to mortals. Their abodes were exquisite palaces, marvels of architecture that perpetually maintained an ideal, temperate climate throughout every season. Yet, of paramount significance to the unfolding narrative, they possessed fire, not merely an ordinary flame, but a celestial, inextinguishable fire, imbued with the power to forge and inspire wonders beyond mortal comprehension. However, Zeus, the sovereign of the gods, had unequivocally decreed that this potent element, fire, was far too formidable and perilous to be entrusted to humankind. He harbored deep anxieties that if mortal beings were to wield such a force, they would inevitably cultivate excessive autonomy, becoming overly proficient and self-reliant. His concerns extended to the possibility that they might cease their proper reverence and adoration of the gods. Worse still, he feared they might even conceive the audacious notion of challenging the very authority of the Olympians themselves. It was, Zeus shrewdly concluded, a far safer stratagem to maintain humanity in a state of perpetual dependence and subservience, akin to young children who rely entirely on their parents for every fundamental necessity. Prometheus, however, held a starkly contrasting viewpoint. He observed with profound empathy as humans shivered uncontrollably through the frigid nights, consumed uncooked sustenance, and struggled to navigate the world once darkness descended. To him, this widespread suffering appeared gratuitously cruel. Humans, in his estimation, were not aspiring to dominion over the cosmos or seeking the boon of immortality. Their humble desires merely encompassed the warmth of a hearth, the ability to properly prepare their provisions, and a modest source of illumination when the sun completed its daily journey. These, Prometheus reasoned, struck him as entirely justifiable petitions, fundamental requirements that any benevolent entity would instinctively wish to alleviate. Thus he began to meticulously devise a clandestine scheme. Its execution would demand utmost subtlety, for Zeus's omnipresent gaze was unceasing, and it would require unparalleled swiftness. Knowing that the moment Zeus unraveled the deception, the retribution would be immediate and unsparing, Prometheus had contemplated this intricate dilemma for an extended period, and through his prolonged observation, he had discerned a crucial characteristic of the Olympian realm's operations. The gods, much like their mortal counterparts, adhered to predictable routines, and these very routines inadvertently furnished opportune moments for intervention. Daily, the deities ignited a magnificent conflagration for their ceremonial feasts and solemn rituals. This sacred flame blazed within a distinctive brazier positioned at the very heart of their grand assembly hall, vigilantly tended by an array of lesser gods and ethereal spirits throughout the daylight hours. Yet, a fleeting window of vulnerability emerged immediately following the evening repast, when all present were engrossed in lively discourse and diverting entertainment, leaving the divine fire momentarily unsupervised for a few invaluable minutes. Prometheus patiently awaited the arrival of precisely such an evening. The Olympian assembly had been immersed in a jubilant celebration, perhaps commemorating a divine birthday or the triumphant resolution of some significant celestial endeavor. The air resonated with melodious music and effervescent laughter, while ambrosial wine flowed without restraint, rendering every deity present thoroughly relaxed and content. Zeus himself was deeply engrossed in an animated discussion with his powerful brothers, his hands gesturing expansively as he recounted a thrilling saga of his most recent exploits, his resonant voice reverberating majestically throughout the expansive marble halls. With an air of studied nonchalance, as if merely stretching his limbs after the lavish meal, Prometheus casually ambled towards the magnificent central fire. He had meticulously prepared for this pivotal moment by bringing with him a hollow fennel stalk, an object seemingly innocuous, yet ingeniously capable of concealing and transporting fire within its core, completely hidden from casual scrutiny. The stalk of fennel possessed sufficient length to reach the incandescent flames, yet was slender enough to be effortlessly secreted within the folds of his robes. Executing movements so fluid and natural that they attracted no particular notice, Prometheus deftly dipped the extremity of the fennel stalk into the sacred, divine fire. The flame, with an almost imperceptible spark, ignited within the hollow interior of the stem, remaining entirely visible from the exterior, yet burning with a steady, resolute glow within. He then sealed the end with a small quantity of clay, effectively encasing the stolen fire like a profound secret awaiting its grand revelation. The entire meticulous procedure consumed less than a minute, and to any casual observer, he appeared to be doing nothing more than idly stirring the embers, a common action at social gatherings. The subsequent phase presented the most formidable challenge, departing Olympus without arousing the slightest suspicion. Prometheus understood that a simple disappearance would be instantly detected and lead to his immediate apprehension. Instead, he was compelled to engage in polite pleasantries, offer feigned laughter at Zeus's bombastic anecdotes, and progressively maneuver himself towards the periphery of the assembly, as though merely preparing to retire after a convivial evening. Each passing minute felt like an agonizing hour. Every seemingly innocuous inquiry from another god resonated like a rigorous interrogation. Finally, with a sigh of internal relief, he managed to discreetly disengage from the divine revelry and commence his perilous descent towards the mortal realm. This journey, even for a god, typically demanded a significant expenditure of time. However, Prometheus was propelled by an overwhelming sense of urgency. Every fleeting moment of delay represented another opportunity for Zeus to discover the irreplaceable loss, another chance for his audacious plan to be exposed before its ultimate fruition. He ultimately located a small gathering of humans encamped beside a winding riverbank, precisely the same group he had been observing with growing concern for many months. They were huddled tightly together, seeking meager refuge from the biting cold, gnawing on tough, raw roots and meager strips of dried meat, patiently awaiting the dawn's arrival so they might gain sufficient visibility to resume their arduous search for sustenance. Their countenances were etched with weariness and a stoic resignation, reflecting the quiet, enduring fortitude of a people who had learned, through harsh experience, to anticipate very little in the way of comfort or fortune from their existence. Prometheus approached them with deliberate slowness, acutely aware of his imposing presence and desirous of not causing them alarm. Gods typically refrained from direct interaction with mortals, and when such encounters did transpire, they often heralded ill tidings. Yet, an inherent gentleness and reassuring demeanor emanated from Prometheus. He knelt down amongst them, as if he naturally belonged within their humble circle, and with meticulous care removed the clay seal from his hollow fennel stalk. What unfolded next must have appeared to these awe-struck humans as the most extraordinary display of magic they had ever been privileged to witness. A vibrant flame materialized as if from thin air, dancing with captivating energy at the tip of Prometheus's simple stick. This, however, was no ordinary terrestrial fire. It was the very essence of divine fire, burning with an unparalleled brilliance and pristine clarity, far surpassing any earthly conflagration they had ever encountered, simultaneously casting forth both radiant light and comforting warmth in perfect, harmonious equilibrium. Prometheus then meticulously instructed them on the fundamental principles of fire management, how to sustain the flame with readily available dry wood and leaves, how to carefully bank it to ensure a slow, enduring burn throughout the long, dark night, and crucially, how to utilize its heat to cook meat, rendering it infinitely safer and immeasurably more palatable than anything they had ever tasted before. He imparted the knowledge of crafting rudimentary torches, enabling them to carry the precious light with them during their travels. Furthermore, he even demonstrated how to harness the power of fire to harden the tips of their spears, significantly enhancing their hunting efficacy, and how to effectively employ its glow and crackle to deter dangerous predatory animals lurking in the shadows. Yet, the profound gift of fire transcended its immediate practical utility. It marked nothing less than the seminal moment in the genesis of civilization itself. Armed with fire, humans gained the unprecedented ability to labor after dusk, thereby dramatically extending their productive hours. They could now inhabit colder, previously uninhabitable climates, facilitating a significant expansion of their territorial reach. The development of cooking, made possible by fire, led directly to vastly improved nutrition, which in turn freed up invaluable time for pursuits beyond the relentless scramble for raw sustenance. Moreover, the congregational power of warmth and light fostered communal gathering, inspiring the telling of intricate stories, the formulation of ambitious plans, and the transformation of solitary individuals struggling for survival into cohesive, burgeoning societies. Most significantly, fire instilled within humankind an entirely novel sense of mastery and dominion over their immediate environment, an experience utterly alien to them before. For the first time in their existence, they possessed the means to actively alter their circumstances, rather than merely enduring them. They could now purposefully enhance their lives through their own concerted efforts and burgeoning intelligence. The incandescent flame that Prometheus so courageously bestowed upon them was, in essence, the very flame of hope itself. Back on the celestial heights of Olympus, it required little time for Zeus to perceive that a subtle yet profound shift had occurred. The sacred divine fire, which typically burned with unyielding vigor, now flickered noticeably lower than its customary intensity. Concurrently, disconcerting reports began to filter in from other gods, detailing strange, unearthly lights that had been observed radiating from the mortal world below. When Zeus finally grasped the full, devastating implication of what had transpired, his wrath was instantaneous and cataclysmic, causing the very foundations of the majestic mountain palace to tremble violently under the force of his fury. However, The truly intriguing aspect of Zeus's formidable reaction lay beyond the mere act of theft itself. His anger was not solely directed at the transgression, but rather at the profound symbolic message it conveyed. Prometheus had indeed flouted a direct, unequivocal divine edict, but more than that, his actions unequivocally demonstrated that he prioritized the welfare and advancement of humanity above the sacrosanct authority of the Olympian pantheon. This was precisely the kind of rebellious ideology that Zeus had so gravely feared, the sort of dangerous precedent that possessed the potential to unravel the meticulously ordered fabric of the entire cosmic hierarchy. The retribution Zeus conceived for Prometheus was meticulously designed to be both excruciatingly severe and deeply symbolic. Prometheus was condemned to be eternally shackled to a desolate mountain peak within the formidable Caucasus Range, bound by unbreakable chains, forged to withstand any conceivable force in the universe. Yet, this perpetual imprisonment was not the most dire component of his agonizing punishment. Mere physical bonds were deemed insufficient to satiate Zeus's profound sense of violated justice. Each successive day, an immense predatory eagle would descend upon the very mountain where Prometheus was immutably chained. This fearsome avian predator would mercilessly tear open Prometheus's side and proceed to devour his liver, inflicting unimaginable, excruciating agony. However, owing to Prometheus's inherent immortality, his liver would miraculously regenerate and completely heal overnight. And, with the relentless precision of a cosmic clock, the colossal eagle would return the following day to reenact the horrific ritual. This infernal punishment was meticulously crafted to persist for all eternity, an unending, agonizing cycle of torment and miraculous regeneration. This relentless punishment was intended to persist indefinitely, until such time as Prometheus capitulated, agreeing to offer a heartfelt apology and solemnly pledging never again to meddle with or defy the divine will. Zeus harbored an unwavering conviction that eventually the relentless pain and soul-crushing monotony of his suffering would inevitably fracture even Prometheus's famously unyielding resolve. After all, eternity, as Zeus well knew, represents an immeasurably vast expanse of time to endure torment for a solitary act of defiance. But it is at this juncture that the narrative truly ascends to a realm of remarkable profundity. Despite the unceasing daily agony, despite the profound isolation and the endless, crushing repetition of his torment, Prometheus never once harbored a single regret concerning his momentous decision to aid humanity. When other compassionate gods occasionally visited him in his desolate confinement, gently suggesting that he could bring an end to his torment by simply tendering an apology to Zeus, he steadfastly refused, even when the sheer intensity of his pain rendered coherent speech a monumental effort. His rationale was both elegantly simple and profoundly insightful. He had witnessed firsthand the immense potential of what humans could achieve when empowered with the essential tools to elevate their lives. Even from the harrowing vantage point of his mountain prison, he could discern the faint tendrils of smoke from their burgeoning fires, spreading across the vast expanse of the world below. He knew, with an unwavering certainty, that they were now preparing superior sustenance, finding warmth and solace during the harsh winter months, and embarking upon the nascent development of the arts and sciences, all made possible by the transformative power of fire. Every single day of excruciating pain, Prometheus firmly believed, was a price well worth paying. for it had secured something utterly invaluable for all of humankind. Humans, for their part, retained an indelible memory of Prometheus's profound contributions. They bestowed upon him the epithet of the Firebringer, and across generations, they recounted numerous narratives celebrating his profound bravery and selfless immolation. Indeed, a pervasive belief emerged that the very faculties enabling human thought, artistic creation, and profound affection stemmed directly from Prometheus, who, alongside his fiery boon, had infused them with a portion of his ethereal essence, a spark of his own celestial vitality. Across the diverse mediums of their artistic expressions and lyrical verses, he was perpetually commemorated, not as a deity subjected to punitive measures, but rather as an exemplary champion who had consciously prioritized altruistic devotion above personal security and well-being. Ultimately, following the passage of innumerable centuries, Prometheus was finally liberated from the harsh confines of his ceaseless torment. However, the intricate details of his eventual emancipation constitute a separate tale, reserved perhaps for a future tranquil gathering. For the present discourse, the paramount significance lies in comprehending the profound implications of his self-abnegation and the underlying motivations that compelled him to undergo such immense suffering on behalf of a populace with whom he possessed only a nascent familiarity. His actions were not predicated upon the pursuit of renown, the yearning for public acknowledgement, nor even the expectation of reciprocal appreciation. Instead, his profound commitment originated from an innate capacity to discern latent capabilities within others, coupled with an unwavering readiness to bear any cost necessary to facilitate the actualization of that inherent promise. It is conceivable that this stemmed from Prometheus's profound grasp of a fundamental truth, one that Zeus, in his relentless preoccupation with preserving his dominion and upholding cosmic equilibrium, had evidently overlooked. The most invaluable boon one can bestow upon an individual or a collective is not merely a state of immediate ease or assured security, but rather the essential instruments and capabilities required for them to forge their own enduring well-being and protection. The gift of fire transcended its utilitarian applications of providing warmth or facilitating culinary preparations. It embodied the profound principle that humanity inherently merited the opportunity to elevate their existence, to evolve beyond their current state, and realize a greater potential. Consequently, this venerable narrative perhaps retains its compelling resonance even in the contemporary era, particularly as individuals contemplate the myriad decisions they confront and the sacrifices they are prepared to render for their deeply held convictions, perhaps as they drift towards sleep. In every instance where an individual jeopardizes their personal repose to extend assistance to fellow beings, whenever knowledge or vital resources are willingly disseminated with the aim of fostering global betterment, there is an unmistakable echo of Prometheus, the formidable Titan, whose resolute conviction dictated that certain ideals warrant profound tribulation, and that the illumination we impart to others remains undiminished, indeed often amplified, through its generous distribution. Just as Prometheus had demonstrated a profound comprehension that intractable dilemmas frequently necessitate unconventional approaches for their resolution, so too does another narrative unfold, illustrating the power of divergent thought. This subsequent account, however, originates not from the ethereal domain of the divine, but rather from the grim realities of martial engagement. Following a protracted decade of unremitting hostilities, the combatants on opposing fronts experienced a weariness that transcended mere physical fatigue. Their exhaustion permeated their very being, settling deep within their skeletal structures and their emotional cores, far surpassing the alleviation a simple night's slumber could provide. A profound yearning for their distant homes and cherished kin weighed heavily upon them, compounded by an increasing disillusionment with a martial objective whose clarity seemed to diminish with every successive period. It was amidst this pervasive climate of profound lassitude and intense nostalgia that one of history's most renowned stratagems was conceived. Its genesis was not rooted in malice or animosity, but rather in the elemental aspiration of countless warriors to at last return to their spouses and offspring, to reclaim the tranquil existences they had relinquished so many years prior. The protracted conflict at Troy had endured for such an extensive duration that a significant portion of the younger military personnel found themselves unable to distinctly recall the tenor of life prior to its commencement. Their formative years were largely spent within the confines of military encampments, where they acquired their essential skills during lulls in combat, forging their most profound bonds of camaraderie beneath the imposing silhouette of city ramparts that, despite every concerted effort to penetrate them, remained stubbornly impregnable. Consequently, for these individuals, warfare had ceased to be merely an occupation. It had fundamentally shaped their identities and defined their very essence. Troy itself stood as an extraordinary metropolis, strategically positioned atop an elevated promontory, commanding a sweeping vista of the Aegean Sea, encircled by defensive walls of such immense thickness and towering height that they appeared to be the formidable handiwork of primordial giants, rather than the construct of mortal hands. Each colossal stone block was meticulously interlocked, achieving such flawless precision that it proved impossible to insert even the thinnest knife blade between the joints, and the entire edifice ascended from the terrain with the organic grandeur of natural precipices, conveying the distinct impression that the city had organically emerged from the very hill rather than having been artificially erected upon its summit. Within these formidable fortifications, the Trojan populace enjoyed abundant provisions of sustenance and potable water, supported by an exceptionally robust defensive infrastructure and the inherent strategic benefit of engaging in combat on their familiar native territory. Conversely, the besieging Greek forces, despite possessing numerical superiority and counting among their ranks some of the most formidable warriors globally, found themselves in a protracted stalemate. Yet, after a full decade of relentless, arduous attempts, their advances had been negligible, akin to the Sisyphean task of attempting to pulverize a mountain with mere hammers, an utterly enervating endeavor yielding virtually no discernible outcome. It was the sagacious Odysseus, sovereign ruler of the rugged island of Ithaca, who ultimately conceived the ingenious stratagem destined to bring the protracted conflict to its decisive conclusion. Odysseus was widely celebrated for his acute astuteness, a form of intellect not characterized by ostentatious displays or eloquent oratorical prowess, but rather by a pragmatic, results-oriented capacity for problem-solving, adept at devising effective solutions precisely when conventional methodologies had proven utterly ineffectual. His cognitive faculties possessed the rare ability to scrutinize an ostensibly insurmountable predicament and discern the singular, often minute, crucial element that had eluded the collective perception of others. For many months, he had meticulously contemplated the intractable challenge posed by Troy, assiduously analyzing the city's formidable defensive structures by daylight and spending countless nocturnal hours in wakefulness, observing the flickering, distant torches adorning the battlements and attending to the subtle echoes of activity emanating from within. He systematically scrutinized the habitual practices and diurnal rhythms of its garrison, diligently searching for any latent vulnerability or discernible pattern that could potentially be leveraged. Through this diligent contemplation, he progressively formulated a concept so elegantly straightforward and yet so daringly audacious that its very simplicity suggested a genuine potential for success. The intricate scheme he presented to the assembled Greek commanders represented a radical departure from any prior tactical approach they had employed. Rather than attempting to dismantle Troy's impervious ramparts through brute force, or to deplete its tenacious defenders through prolonged siege and starvation, the objective was to cunningly deceive the Trojans into willingly unbarring their own city gates. Such an undertaking would demand exceptional theatrical performance, impeccably synchronized execution, and an inherent degree of peril that naturally engendered apprehension among certain military leaders. Nevertheless, following a full decade characterized by the futility of orthodox military engagements, they had reached a point of readiness to embrace a decidedly unorthodox strategy. The pivotal element, the veritable fulcrum of Odysseus's meticulously devised strategy, was a colossal equine effigy constructed entirely of wood. This, however, was no ordinary or crude wooden horse. Instead, it was to be an unparalleled tour de force of artisanal skill, so immense in scale and exquisitely beautiful in its execution that it would readily appear as a votive offering truly befitting the Olympian deities themselves. Its design necessitated a grandeur sufficient to capture the unwavering attention and profound inquisitiveness of the Trojans, yet simultaneously required an internal void capacious enough to clandestinely accommodate a select contingent of Greek warriors. Crucially, its outward appearance had to convincingly convey the impression of an authentic religious tribute, a genuine propitiatory gift intentionally abandoned by the Greeks. The arduous undertaking of constructing this monumental steed became an all-consuming enterprise, engaging the collective efforts of the entire Greek encampment for a period spanning several weeks. A primary challenge involved sourcing appropriate timber, robust enough to bear the considerable mass of the edifice and its concealed occupants, yet sufficiently manageable in weight to permit the horses' eventual transportation. Furthermore, the design mandated the incorporation of cleverly concealed access points and discrete ventilation apertures, ensuring their complete invisibility from external scrutiny. Above all, the paramount objective was to craft an artistic creation of such breathtaking aesthetic appeal that the Trojans would be irresistibly compelled to usher it within the sanctity of their city walls. The esteemed master artisan selected for this exacting commission was Hypnos, a Hellenic figure renowned more for his consummate proficiency with instruments of construction than with instruments of warfare. Hypnos embarked upon this endeavor with an identical degree of meticulousness and dedicated focus typically reserved for the erection of a sacred sanctuary or a royal domicile. The majestic equine form that progressively materialized beneath his skilled hands was truly magnificent, adorned with exquisitely intricate carvings, meticulously painted and burnished to a lustrous sheen, causing it to gleam like polished bronze beneath the sun's rays. With every anatomical detail, every muscle and sinew rendered with astonishing verisimilitude, concurrently With the construction of this monumental equine effigy, another equally crucial facet of the comprehensive strategy was meticulously unfolding. The Hellenic forces were tasked with engendering in the Trojans the absolute conviction that they had abandoned their siege and commenced their homeward journey. This intricate deception required not only the clandestine concealment of the warriors destined for the horse's interior, but also the utterly convincing disappearance of the entire Greek military contingent. Following a decade of unremitting presence, their abrupt vanishing act needed to convey an impression of both authenticity and irreversibility. The devised solution involved navigating the fleet to a proximate island, positioned strategically out of sight from Troy's formidable battlements, yet sufficiently near to facilitate a swift return upon the issuance of the prearranged signal. The vast majority of the expeditionary force would depart with the vessels, leaving behind solely the contingent concealed within the horse, along with a solitary volunteer entrusted with the perilous task of presenting the Trojans with a meticulously fabricated narrative. This intrepid volunteer was Sinon, a Greek soldier whose assignment arguably represented the most perilous undertaking within the entirety of the meticulously orchestrated scheme. His mission entailed deliberately permitting his capture by the Trojan defenders, subsequently employing his persuasive abilities to convince them of his status as a disillusioned deserter, possessing vital intelligence concerning the enigmatic wooden effigy. His fabricated account would require an extraordinary degree of plausibility, sufficient to deceive an populace with every legitimate cause for profound suspicion, and simultaneously compelling enough to induce them to act precisely in accordance with the Greeks' covert objectives. Upon the dawn that witnessed the implementation of this elaborate stratagem, the inhabitants of Troy awoke to a sight utterly unanticipated and profoundly disorienting. The vast Greek encampment, which had dominated their horizon for so long, stood completely deserted. The countless vessels that had densely populated the harbor for a full decade had vanished without a trace. The familiar cooking fires, once ever present, were now mere heaps of cold ash. All tents had been systematically dismantled, all military apparatus removed, and the immense besieging army that had relentlessly pressed against their city had utterly dissipated, as ephemeral as a fleeting dream at the break of day. The initial response among the Trojans was one of profound skepticism tempered by extreme caution. Following a full decade of unremitting warfare, the abrupt and complete vanishing of their adversaries appeared almost impossibly fortuitous. Consequently, reconnaissance parties were dispatched to meticulously scour the deserted encampment for any indications of a cunning ambush, while other observers ascended to the loftiest battlements to meticulously survey the expansive horizon for the faintest glimpse of the Greek armada. Yet the vast expanse of the sea remained utterly devoid of sails to the farthest reaches of vision, and the abandoned camp bore every characteristic hallmark of a rapid, yet unequivocally authentic, withdrawal. As the ensuing hours elapsed without the unmasking of any discernible snare, a palpable wave of exhilaration began to surge throughout the city. A collective, hopeful question echoed. Could this protracted ordeal genuinely be concluded? Had the Greeks, at long last, relinquished their siege and returned to their distant homelands? Amidst this burgeoning elation, the silent, imposing wooden horse, solitary on the shoreline, swiftly became the epicenter of fervent curiosity and animated discussion. While some regarded its aesthetic qualities with admiration, others perceived an inherent foreboding, yet there was universal consensus that its presence was utterly unignorable. A segment of the Trojan populace firmly believed it to be an unequivocal ruse of some nature, advocating for its immediate destruction. Conversely, another faction contended with equal fervor that it represented an unambiguous sacred oblation, intentionally left to propitiate the deities for the Greeks' unsuccessful efforts to subjugate the city. A smaller contingent proposed that its intrinsic value might be substantial enough to warrant its preservation, irrespective of its original intended function. The spirited deliberation persisted for many hours, characterized by impassioned arguments articulated from every conceivable viewpoint. During the fervent discussions surrounding the mysterious wooden effigy, a lone figure named Sinon was unearthed, concealed amidst the desolate remnants of the Hellenic encampment, seemingly endeavoring to evade detection. Upon his apprehension and presentation before the esteemed Trojan chieftains, he adopted an air of profound trepidation and an apparent unwillingness to articulate himself. This carefully orchestrated display, naturally, was precisely the illusion he intended to project. Such palpable fear and hesitant demeanor proved far more persuasive and disarming than any overt enthusiasm or immediate collaboration could have ever achieved. The elaborate narrative spun by Sinon was meticulously crafted, shrewdly capitalizing on his astute understanding of Trojan sensibilities and their deep-seated reverence. He asserted his identity as a desperate deserter, having purportedly absconded from the Hellenic forces after being designated as a human oblation, a grim ritual intended to invoke propitious gales for their homeward voyage. The colossal wooden equine, he maintained, was unequivocally a sacred votive, erected to propitiate the wrath of Athena, whom the Greeks had grievously affronted by purloining a hallowed effigy from her venerable sanctuary within Troy's hallowed precincts. Yet, the pivotal revelation of his account lay in the assertion that the Hellenes had intentionally constructed the steed to be of such immense proportions that it could not possibly pass through Troy's formidable portals. This, he explained, was because a divine pronouncement had foretold that should the Trojans ever succeed in ushering the monumental offering into their city, Troy would be eternally consecrated by Athena's favor and rendered impervious to any future conquest. The Greeks, Sinon vehemently declared, had engineered the horse's gargantuan size with the precise intention of precluding this auspicious outcome. This revelation resonated perfectly with the aspirations and desires of the Trojan populace, providing precisely the assurance they yearned for. The prospect of conveying the magnificent horse within their city's confines was not merely deemed safe, it was now perceived as an act that would fundamentally enhance their might and ensure an unprecedented level of security. Consequently, the fervent deliberations concerning the artifact's fate rapidly transitioned from a cautious assessment of its potential perils to an enthusiastic strategizing over the swiftest possible method for its ingress within their protective ramparts. Abruptly, the notion of abandoning such a potent symbol on the shoreline appeared tantamount to squandering an extraordinary, divinely offered advantage. The monumental task of maneuvering the gargantuan wooden horse through the city's formidable gates necessitated an undertaking of significant engineering prowess. The venerable portals themselves required extensive modification, being widened considerably, while carefully selected segments of the defensive wall had to be meticulously and temporarily dismantled. This arduous endeavor consumed the better part of the day, demanding the collective strength and coordinated efforts of countless individuals, indeed, hundreds of people. Nevertheless, by evening's descent, the colossal wooden effigy proudly stood within the vibrant central square of Troy, encircled by an exultant throng of citizens who firmly embraced the conviction that they had secured not merely a triumph in battle, but an enduring, immutable pledge of their beloved city's perpetual inviolability. On that fateful evening, the city of Troy erupted in a paroxysm of revelry, a jubilant outpouring of emotion unparalleled in the preceding decade. The thoroughfares echoed with the sounds of boisterous feasting and copious libations, while melodies and rhythmic dancing filled the starlit air. A pervasive sense of liberation permeated the atmosphere, for the protracted conflict was, in their minds, definitively concluded. Their cherished metropolis was now deemed utterly secure, its safety underscored by the imposing presence of their magnificent, newly acquired trophy. As the nocturnal hours advanced and the festivities escalated in fervor, the Trojan populace, one by one, gradually gravitated towards their domiciles and slumber, utterly spent by the intoxicating blend of exhilaration and profound alleviation. They retired to their beds, succumbing to a profound repose, slumbering with a depth of tranquility unfelt for an entire 10-year span. Yet, within the hollow confines of the colossal wooden horse, a select detachment of Hellenic warriors endured a claustrophobic and profoundly uncomfortable vigil, shrouded in an oppressive silence. They had remained secreted within this ingenious contrivance for almost 2 full days, their movements severely restricted, subsisting on meager rations of sustenance and hydration. Their senses were acutely attuned to the vibrant cacophony of the celebrating city that surrounded them, as they steadfastly awaited the precise, opportune instant for their clandestine egress. Though every sinew protested with an agonizing ache and every articulation felt rigidly immobile, they persevered with the unwavering fortitude and calculated patience characteristic of individuals who recognized that their long-anticipated, decisive moment was at last drawing nigh. As the boisterous city at last succumbed to a profound hush, and the final lingering celebrants had wearily made their way back to their abodes, the sagacious Odysseus imparted the prearranged signal. With an almost imperceptible creak, the cleverly concealed portal in the horse's voluminous abdomen swung open, allowing, one after another, the Greek warriors to descend with practiced stealth into the silver-washed, moonlit central square of Troy. They proceeded through the deeply slumbering metropolis with the spectral grace of phantoms, their footfalls expertly dampened, their armaments poised for immediate deployment, yet harboring a fervent hope that their use would prove unnecessary. Their paramount objective was to swiftly reach the formidable city gates and unbar them for the main contingent of the Hellenic army, which had clandestinely returned under the cloak of profound darkness and lay in wait just beyond the imposing fortifications. This particular maneuver represented the most perilous segment of the entire intricate stratagem, should the Trojan populace become aware of the unfolding treachery before the gates were fully secured. The small band of Greek infiltrators would find themselves irrevocably ensnared within the city's confines, bereft of any prospect of retreat or external aid. However, fortune, coupled with meticulous foresight, favored their audacious undertaking. The Trojans, utterly depleted by their fervent festivities and convinced of their absolute security behind their unbreachable ramparts, remained steeped in profound slumber. The Greek warriors, moving with practiced stealth, attained the gates without encountering a solitary sentinel, and in a matter of mere moments, They had expertly disengaged the enormous, weighty bars and chains that had, for an arduous 10 years, repelled their adversaries. The colossal gates of Troy, with an almost ethereal silence, swung open on their well-oiled hinges, signaling the virtual conclusion of a conflict that had endured for an entire decade. The events that subsequently transpired unfolded with astonishing rapidity and conclusive finality. Yet there inheres an almost paradoxical sense of anticlimax in the abruptness with which the entire protracted conflict was resolved once the ingenious ruse had been successfully implemented. Following a grueling decade characterized by relentless siege warfare, by legendary heroes engaging in valiant single combat, by the deployment of elaborate strategic maneuvers and valiant, desperate defensive actions, the ultimate denouement was penned not through the raw power of the sword, but rather through astute intellectual ingenuity and meticulous, unwavering execution. It stood as a resounding affirmation of the supremacy of intellect over unrefined physical might, of precise, forethoughtful planning transcending blunt, direct confrontation. The profound moral embedded within the narrative of the Trojan horse extends far beyond a mere commentary on the ingenious cunning of the Greeks or the regrettable credulity of the Trojans. It fundamentally illuminates the principle that resolutions to dilemmas that appear utterly insurmountable frequently arise from a paradigm shift in thought, from engaging with the predicament from an entirely unforeseen vantage point. Occasionally, the most straightforward, direct route is not merely the most arduous, but indeed an utterly impracticable one. There are instances where one must strategically withdraw, reevaluate the challenge from an innovative perspective, and devise an alternative course that circumvents the obstacle rather than attempting to force a passage directly through it. Furthermore, perhaps an additional, equally significant precept can be gleaned regarding the inherent peril of harboring the conviction that any triumph is immutable, or that any defensive fortification, however formidable, is truly impervious. The Trojans had steadfastly endured a decade of incessant siege warfare, repelling every single assault and outmaneuvering every conceivable stratagem their adversaries could contrive. Their profound reliance upon the robust integrity of their walls and the vigilance of their sentinels was, under normal circumstances, wholly justifiable. That is, until the moment it ceased to be so. Even the most robust and seemingly impenetrable bulwarks can, at times, be surmounted, not through overt aggression or overwhelming might, but by subtly manipulating the very will of the defenders to willingly dismantle or compromise their own protective measures. As one contemplates this venerable narrative, perhaps in the quietude preceding slumber, one might fully apprehend both the extraordinary sagacity of Odysseus and the profound pathos of Troy's downfall. It vividly illustrates the remarkable capacity of human ingenuity to unravel seemingly intractable predicaments, yet it simultaneously underscores the indelible truth that trust, once grievously violated, can seldom, if ever, be fully restored to its original state. The iconic wooden horse endures as a potent emblem, a somber memento that often the most outwardly alluring offerings carry the most exorbitant hidden costs, and that the human intellect, when judiciously and strategically deployed, can indeed wield a power far surpassing that of all the assembled armies across the globe. Just as the sagacious Odysseus discerned that the most intricate dilemmas occasionally yield to astonishingly straightforward resolutions, so too does another ancient narrative unfold, chronicling a distinct odyssey. This particular saga commenced as a relatively uncomplicated pursuit, yet it rapidly blossomed into an endeavor of far greater complexity and profound challenge. This is the compelling chronicle of Jason and his vessel, laden with a pantheon of legendary heroes, embarking upon a perilous voyage towards a fabled treasure that appeared utterly unattainable, traversing treacherous seas that subjected them to trials and tribulations far beyond their wildest imaginings. The epic narrative of Jason found its genesis in one of those intricate familial discordances that, while appearing minor in their nascent stages, inexorably burgeon into conflicts that irrevocably determine the trajectories of entire existences. His malevolent uncle, Peleus, had usurped the royal dominion that was, by birthright, the rightful inheritance of Jason's father. Now, having attained the full stature of manhood, Jason had returned with an unwavering resolve to reclaim his patrimony. This volatile confrontation possessed the potential to ignite a devastating civil war, precipitating years of internecine strife and widespread carnage, were it not for the insidious craftiness of Peleus. Rather than engaging Jason in a direct, potentially costly struggle, Peleus extended a deceptive proposition. He declared his willingness to relinquish the throne without contest, he asserted, provided Jason could successfully accomplish a singular, formidable undertaking to retrieve the fabled golden fleece from the distant, mysterious realm of Colchis. On the surface, this appeared to be a perfectly equitable, perhaps even magnanimous stipulation, until one grasped the grim reality that no individual who had ever embarked upon a quest for the golden fleece had ever managed to return. Peleus was, in essence, tendering the crown to Jason as a direct exchange for Jason's certain demise. Nevertheless, Jason, imbued with the characteristic ardor and self-assurance of youth, found himself encircled by a coterie of companions who mirrored his own youthful vigor and unwavering conviction. The romanticized notion of an epic, heroic quest, of venturing forth into uncharted territories to claim a legendary prize that would definitively assure his future prosperity and rightful place, captivated his spirit in a manner that protracted periods of political machination and cautious diplomatic negotiation could never have achieved. He embraced the daunting challenge with alacrity and almost instantaneously commenced the meticulous orchestration of what would become the most ambitious and grandest expedition ever conceived or attempted. The foundational undertaking for this monumental quest involved the construction of a vessel truly commensurate with the extraordinary nature of their mission. This was not destined to be a commonplace merchantman or a simple fishing skiff, but rather a sophisticated craft meticulously engineered for arduous, protracted voyages across treacherous, unmapped maritime expanses. Jason entrusted the esteemed master shipwright, Argos, with the singular commission to fashion a creation unprecedented in its design and capabilities. The envisioned ship needed to be sufficiently capacious to accommodate a formidable complement of heroes, possess the requisite velocity to evade marauding buccaneers and monstrous denizens of the deep, and exhibit an inherent robustness capable of weathering any tempestuous gales they might inevitably encounter. The vessel that Argus painstakingly constructed was, by all accounts, a marvel of maritime engineering and aesthetic splendor. He bestowed upon it the appellation Argo, a tribute to his own name, and it rapidly garnered renown not merely for its impressive dimensions and inherent grace, but for the extraordinary attention to detail infused into every single component of its fabrication. The very timber for its hull was sourced from hallowed groves, imbued with the blessings of the Olympian deities. Its commanding figurehead was meticulously sculpted from a venerable oak tree, reputed to possess the uncanny ability to articulate prophetic utterances. Each strand of rope, every expansive sail, and even the most unassuming wooden peg was affixed with the unparalleled exactitude of a preeminent artisan, a master craftsman who fully comprehended that the very existence and destiny of legendary heroes would ultimately hinge upon the integrity of his meticulous handiwork. However, even the most exquisitely fashioned vessel, irrespective of its inherent structural integrity, is ultimately defined by the caliber of its complement. Jason, therefore, required mariners who transcended mere proficiency. He sought individuals endowed with the indomitable spirit to confront the seemingly insurmountable and persevere relentlessly. Consequently, a fervent summons resonated throughout the length and breadth of Greece, inviting valiant heroes to enlist in this unprecedented expedition. The ensuing response was nothing short of phenomenal. Distinguished warriors, gifted musicians, unparalleled athletes, and intrepid adventurers converged from every remote corner of the Hellenic dominion, each contributing their unique proficiencies and personal histories to the burgeoning roster. Among them was, naturally, Heracles, the mightiest mortal to have ever drawn breath, whose mere formidable presence was sufficient to deter the majority of potential adversaries from contemplating an assault. There was also Orpheus, whose enchanting lyre could pacify ferocious beasts and mollify even the most untamed spirits. The renowned twin siblings, Castor and Pollux, celebrated for their exceptional prowess in pugilism and equestrianism, also joined. And remarkably, Atalanta, the peerless huntress, capable of outstripping any male runner and demonstrating an unerring accuracy with her bow superior to any living archer, also lent her formidable talents. Every individual chosen for the monumental undertaking, collectively known as the Argonauts, contributed a distinct and invaluable quality to the perilous journey. Some among their number were celebrated for their formidable physical might, while others possessed an acute and profound sagacity. There were those who distinguished themselves as exceptionally skilled celestial navigators, capable of interpreting the intricate tapestry of the night sky to guide their vessel. Conversely, certain members exhibited remarkable diplomatic prowess, adept at parleying with the rulers of distant lands. A significant portion simply comprised intrepid young men, their hearts yearning for grand adventure, utterly captivated by the romantic notion of venturing into uncharted territories alongside figures of legendary renown. The epic voyage itself commenced on a remarkably tranquil morning, when the vast expanse of the sea shimmered with a dazzling, gem-like brilliance, and the gentle breezes billowed their sails, imbuing the air with the palpable promise of thrilling exploits. The magnificent vessel, the Argo, cleaved through the azure waters with the keen precision of a sharpened blade, steadfastly conveying its esteemed company of valorous individuals towards the remote coasts of Colchis, where the coveted golden fleece patiently awaited their arrival. Initially, for the inaugural several days, the maritime expedition unfolded with the joyous atmosphere of a triumphant festival. These were young men in the zenith of their youth, charting a course for renown beneath an unblemished firmament. Yet, The vast and unpredictable sea possesses an inherent capacity for challenging even the most self-assured mariners. The Argonauts swiftly came to the realization that their true adversities resided not merely in the ultimate goal of reaching Colchis, but intrinsically within the arduous progression of the Odyssey itself. They contended with ferocious tempests that rigorously tested their seamanship, navigated past islands inhabited by enigmatic creatures, and encountered diverse peoples possessing unfamiliar traditions and tongues. With each passing day, fresh dilemmas emerged, demanding innovative solutions and the acquisition of novel proficiencies. One of their initial formidable obstacles manifested when they were compelled to navigate the simple Gades, the notorious colliding crags that stood sentinel at the gateway to the Black Sea. These were colossal geological formations that would violently converge without warning, pulverizing anything unfortunate enough to be caught within their grasp. Countless vessels had met their demise attempting this passage, with the skeletal remains of sailors littering the seabed beneath the perilous channel. The eventual resolution to this deadly predicament arose from meticulous scrutiny and impeccable synchronization. The Argonauts dedicated days to observing the formidable rocks, diligently deciphering their cyclic movements, learning to anticipate precisely when they would expand and when they would violently retract. When they finally embarked on their audacious attempt, it demanded flawless synchronicity. Every man propelled his oar in perfect unison. Every sail was meticulously set to capture the optimal gusts of wind, and the helmsman guided the vessel with instantaneous, split-second accuracy. They successfully traversed the passage with scant margins, the crags closing behind them so narrowly that they merely abraded marine encrustations from the Argo's stern. Nevertheless, they had triumphed over the initial monumental trial of their journey, and this success instilled in them a profound certitude that they possessed the capability to surmount whatever other adversities lay ahead. They were no longer merely disparate champions. They were evolving into a unified collective. The protracted maritime expedition, spanning many arduous months, imparted invaluable lessons that no amount of terrestrial preparation could have replicated. They acquired the crucial ability to collaborate effectively amidst duress, to confidently rely on one another's diverse proficiencies, and to equitably distribute duties and endure shared privations devoid of acrimony. They came to understand that heroism transcended mere personal might or audacity. It was fundamentally about discerning the appropriate moments for command and submission, when to embrace perils and when to exercise prudence. Furthermore, they gained profound self-knowledge. Removed from the customary domestic environments of their homelands and confronted with novel trials that rigorously scrutinized their mettle, each man unearthed latent aptitudes and previously unacknowledged constraints. Some discovered they possessed greater fortitude than they had ever imagined. Others recognized hidden talents for leadership or diplomacy that had lain dormant. A select few realized that the renown they had initially pursued was ultimately secondary to the profound camaraderie they were cultivating among themselves. Upon their ultimate arrival at Colchis, when they finally beheld the radiant golden fleece suspended from its arboreal perch within the hallowed coppice, vigilantly protected by a perpetually wakeful serpent, they comprehended with striking clarity that all their preceding maritime tribulations had served as a crucible, meticulously forging them for this precise juncture. The fleece itself was exquisitely magnificent, defying any attempt at comprehensive description. Its wool appeared to ensnare and retain solar luminescence, glittering with an effulgence that imbued it with a palpable sense of vitality. Yet, the formidable task of its acquisition would necessitate the full application of every lesson they had gleaned concerning collective collaborative wisdom. The monarch of Colchis imposed upon them a series of ostensibly insurmountable challenges, harnessing infernal, fire-breathing bovines, planting reptilian fangs that upon germination manifested as fully armed martial combatants, and vanquishing formidable beings impervious to solitary prowess. However, the Argonauts had, through their trials, assimilated the profound truth that insurmountable endeavors frequently yielded to feasibility when approached with perseverance, collective effort, and inventive strategizing. They had also discerned that crucial aid frequently originates from unforeseen quarters. In this specific instance, that invaluable assistance emanated from Medea, the king's own daughter, who possessed an extensive expertise in arcane arts and botanical lore that proved indispensable for their ultimate triumph. Her assistance, however, incurred a significant stipulation. Jason pledged matrimony and safe passage for her when they embarked on their homeward journey. Nevertheless, this alliance allowed them to fulfill their momentous mission and secure the coveted golden fleece they had journeyed so extensively to discover. The homeward-bound expedition diverged considerably from their initial outward voyage. They were now repatriating champions, proudly bearing their coveted trophy. Yet, they were also markedly more seasoned and sagacious, profoundly refined by an extended period of collective tribulations and profound realizations. They had unequivocally learned that the genuine riches of their quest did not reside in the golden fleece per se, but rather in the enduring connections they had cultivated and in the profound transformation of the individuals they had evolved into by confronting adversities in unison. Following their return, some of the Argonauts subsequently embarked upon celebrated exploits independently. Others, conversely, retreated to tranquil existences within their respective home cities, entirely satisfied by their participation in a grander endeavor. Universally, however, all of them retained the indelible understanding that they had been an integral component of a crew that had achieved a remarkable feat, not solely through singular acts of valor, but fundamentally through cultivating mutual reliance and concerted effort towards a shared objective. And perhaps the profound moral emanating from the saga of Jason and the Argonauts is precisely this, that the most significant expeditions are frequently those undertaken in companionship with others, and that the paramount riches are neither precious metals nor enchanted artifacts, but rather the interpersonal bonds forged and the profound personal evolution attained throughout the journey. As we contemplate repose, perhaps we can acknowledge the profound fortitude it demands, not merely to commence grand odysseys, but to consciously embrace the transformative potential inherent in such ventures and in the diverse individuals encountered therein. Recalling how Jason and his valiant crew assimilated the principle that profound adversities frequently yield the most precious insights, it is pertinent to introduce a distinct narrative concerning trials and enlightenment, though this particular account is markedly dissimilar. This is the tragic tale of Sisyphus, a cunning monarch who, in his arrogance, presumed his intellect surpassed even that of the Olympian deities, and who ultimately discovered that certain insights are exacted with an eternal, unyielding cost. Sisyphus held the esteemed position of sovereign of Corinth, a prosperous and influential polis strategically situated to command crucial commercial arteries. He was renowned across all of Hellas for his acute intellect and wily stratagems, celebrated for his singular ability to unravel dilemmas that utterly confounded other potentates and to extricate himself from predicaments that would have annihilated less resourceful individuals. He harbored a deep vainglory concerning these remarkable faculties, and it was perhaps this very hubris that ultimately fostered the dangerous conviction within him that he could circumvent the sagacity of any entity, even the deathless divinities themselves. His misfortunes commenced with a series of escalating audacious transgressions against celestial decree. He unscrupulously divulged divine arcana to terrestrial beings, contravened the hallowed tenets of Xenia, sacred hospitality laws, and perpetrated numerous deceptions that transcended mere ingenuity, escalating into egregious arrogance and hubris. Each instance in which he artfully evaded retribution through a novel stratagem or an ingenious contrivance, his certitude in his own intellectual prowess became ever more profoundly entrenched. The ultimate provocation arrived when Thanatos personified, death itself, arrived to assert his prerogative and claim Sisyphus. With characteristic cunning, Sisyphus managed to beguile the embodiment of mortality into donning a pair of manacles, thereby incapacitating him from executing his essential function. For a considerable period, mortality ceased to exist across the globe, a situation that initially seemed like a wondrous boon until the attendant complications became distressingly apparent. The aged were denied serene repose. The wounded were unable to transcend their perpetual suffering, and the cosmic cycle of existence and cessation was utterly disarrayed. Consequently, the Olympian pantheon was compelled to intercede to re-establish universal equilibrium, liberating Thanatos and guaranteeing Sisyphus's ultimate reckoning for his manifold offenses. Yet even within the chthonic realm of the underworld, Sisyphus persisted in his relentless machinations. He cunningly persuaded his spouse to withhold customary funerary rites upon his demise, then leveraged this very pretense to petition for re-entry into the mortal sphere, ostensibly to rectify the oversight. Having achieved his terrestrial reprieve, he predictably declined to revert to the realm of the dead. It necessitated years of divine pursuit for the gods to finally apprehend him anew and forcibly convey him back to Hades, where they unanimously concluded that conventional retribution would prove wholly inadequate for an individual so inveterately ingenious and recalcitrant. The retribution they conceived was exquisitely minimalist, yet utterly dreadful in its design. Sisyphus was condemned to endure perpetual toil, forever propelling an enormous, unyielding boulder up a steep mountain incline. Each day he would strain and contend arduously, expending every ounce of his formidable will to maneuver the prodigious rock to the apex, yet, with a cruel and unvarying regularity, precisely upon attaining the zenith, the megalith would inexorably descend, rolling back down to the very base, compelling him to recommence his Sisyphean labor each subsequent dawn. It was a task that was, in its essence, simultaneously unachievable and imperative, significant in its imposition, yet utterly devoid of inherent purpose. What truly renders this chastisement so profoundly compelling is how flawlessly it mirrored the transgression. Sisyphus had dedicated his entire existence to employing his formidable intellect to circumvent repercussions, to perpetually discover expedients, and to acquire recompense without ever tendering due compensation. Now, he found himself ensnared in a predicament utterly impervious to intellectual acumen, a realm where there existed no bypasses, and where the sole recompense for each day's relentless exertion was the inescapable premonition of reiterated, identical toil on the morrow. Initially, Sisyphus approached his perpetual endeavor with the same self-assurance and intellectual acuity that had characterized his mortal existence. He meticulously scrutinized the massive stone, endeavoring to discern methods that might lighten its formidable weight or facilitate its movement. Concurrently, he thoroughly surveyed the formidable mountain, seeking a more advantageous route or an ingenious contrivance to thwart the rock's inevitable descent. He experimented with a myriad of methodologies, diverse tactical schemes, and varying operational frameworks, utterly convinced that his superior intellect would, in due course, yield a definitive resolution to his predicament. Yet, as the relentless succession of days coalesced into months, and the months inexorably lengthened into years, Sisyphus slowly began to grasp the profound and unalterable essence of his plight. This was not a conundrum amenable to clever solutions, but rather an immutable state of being, a condition demanding unwavering fortitude for its endurance. The immense boulder would forever retain its crushing mass. The ascent of the mountain would remain perpetually arduous, and the stone was predestined to always tumble back down to the valley below. No measure of cunning or intellectual prowess could ever fundamentally alter these inescapable realities. Such a stark realization held the potential to utterly devastate him with profound despair, and for a period, it is plausible that it did. There must have been stretches of profound darkness when the sheer, unyielding futility of his circumstances appeared utterly insupportable, when the ceaseless, monotonous repetition felt akin to a descent into madness. However, an intriguing transformation began to unfold. As the centuries incrementally accumulated, Sisyphus commenced a subtle but significant redefinition of his relationship with the task itself. He relinquished the futile pursuit of a solution and instead embraced the simple act of experiencing the labor. He started to discern nuances he had previously overlooked: the distinct coarseness of the stone beneath his calloused hands, the remarkable manner in which his musculature adapted to the relentless exertion, the subtle yet persistent shifts in atmospheric conditions and ambient light as he undertook his daily upward trek along the mountainside. He cultivated an appreciation for the elemental rhythm of physical labor, recognizing the straightforward and honest connection between effort expended and the immediate, albeit temporary, outcome achieved. A number of philosophical thinkers have advanced the notion that Sisyphus ultimately discovered a peculiar form of serenity within his ceaseless obligation. They posit that he learned to derive genuine contentment from the very act of the work, rather than from its ultimate completion. Indeed, he was engaged in an activity that intrinsically demanded considerable physical fortitude, unwavering resolve, and indefatigable persistence. He found himself utterly immersed in his designated labor, entirely present in each fleeting moment of strenuous exertion, thereby liberated from the myriad distractions and gnawing anxieties that typically afflict those individuals perpetually fixated on distant, prospective rewards. There is an almost contemplative quality inherent in the enduring image of Sisyphus and his monumental stone. It is an archetype that profoundly resonates with our own quotidian struggles against tasks that frequently appear both interminable and devoid of intrinsic purpose. Each of us, in our own way, possesses our unique burdens to propel, our personal summits to scale, are particular duties that must be diligently performed time and again. The pivotal inquiry is not whether we possess the capacity to escape these cyclical obligations, but rather the conscious manner in which we elect to confront and engage with them. Sisyphus eventually apprehended that profound meaning does not invariably emanate from the successful conclusion of tasks, but rather, on occasion, from the conscientious and dedicated manner in which we execute them. A sense of personal pride and deep satisfaction does not always necessitate external commendations or lasting, tangible accomplishments. At times, these profound internal rewards arise from the straightforward, unembellished act of diligently performing what is required, day after day, imbued with skill, unwavering determination, and a spirit of profound acceptance. And perhaps, within this ancient narrative, lies an even more profound ontological insight concerning the very fabric of life itself. The overwhelming majority of our human endeavors are inherently cyclical and repetitive. We awaken, we labor, we nourish ourselves, we rest, only to commence the identical cycle anew with the dawn of the following day. We construct edifices destined, in time, to crumble into dust. We forge relationships that will, inevitably, reach their conclusion. We accumulate reservoirs of knowledge that will, eventually, fade into obscurity. The fundamental question then becomes whether we can unearth genuine meaning and profound satisfaction within the ongoing process, rather than perpetually demanding permanent, immutable results. As our thoughts gently drift towards slumber, contemplating the figure of Sisyphus and his eternal boulder, perhaps we can embrace an understanding that encompasses both the inherent tragedy and the peculiar, unexpected triumph embedded within his saga. He was condemned for his hubris, for presuming himself more sagacious than the omnipotent gods. Yet, in the arduous process of learning to accept his divine retribution, he may well have unearthed a profound species of wisdom that had eluded him throughout his earthly existence, the profound realization that the very act of labor can serve as its own intrinsic recompense, and that an undeniable dignity resides in unwavering persistence, even when the task at hand appears utterly endless. Recalling how Sisyphus ultimately discovered that some of life's most pivotal lessons emerge from the acceptance of the unchangeable, we turn now to another narrative steeped in acceptance and wisdom. This tale, however, unfolds within the hallowed confines of a temple, where individuals from across the vast ancient world converged, seeking answers to the pressing questions that haunted their waking hours and disturbed their repose. This is the chronicle of Delphi, where the revered god Apollo communicated his divine will through the vessel of a mortal woman, and where, on occasion, profound silence conveyed more potent meaning than any spoken utterance. Delphi was majestically situated upon the precipitous slopes of Mount Parnassus, nestled within a topographical expanse that appeared to have been sculpted by the deities themselves, specifically designed to evoke both profound reverence and deep contemplation. The sprawling temple complex clung tenaciously to the mountainside, much like a bird's meticulously constructed eyrie, enveloped by verdant olive groves and crystalline springs that ceaselessly welled forth from the deep subterranean fissures of the earth. It was a singular location where the delicate demarcation between the ephemeral mortal realm and the eternal divine world seemed palpably attenuated, thinner than anywhere else. Here, ordinary individuals could undeniably sense the pervasive presence of an entity immeasurably grander than their own fleeting existence. The Oracle of Delphi was invariably a woman, specifically chosen for her exceptional capacity to receive and accurately interpret the enigmatic visions that the god Apollo transmitted to her. She bore the distinguished title of Pythia, a name derived from Python, the colossal serpent that Apollo had vanquished in order to lay claim to the sacred site for the establishment of his temple. The esteemed role of Pythia constituted both a singular honor and an immense burden. She was universally revered throughout the entirety of the Greek world. Yet the solemn responsibility of serving as the mouthpiece for a divine entity was assuredly not a charge any mortal could undertake without profound trepidation and gravitas. People undertook arduous journeys to Delphi from every remote corner of the sprawling Mediterranean world, often traveling for weeks or even months to finally reach the hallowed precinct. They arrived burdened with inquiries that had troubled their minds for many years, whether to embark upon a military campaign, whom to choose as a life partner, the means to eradicate a devastating plague, or the optimal location to establish a burgeoning new colony. These were far from trivial or casual inquiries. Rather, they represented desperate, fervent pleas for divine direction on decisions that held the power to irrevocably shape entire individual lifetimes or determine the very destinies of whole city-states. The intricate process of consultation was both elaborate in its execution and profoundly solemn in its atmosphere. Visitors were first obliged to undergo rigorous purification rites at the sacred springs, subsequently present appropriate and substantial offerings to the god, and then patiently await their turn in strict adherence to complex protocols that could extend for several days or even weeks. This period of intense anticipation was an integral component of the overall experience. It afforded ample time for deep reflection upon their weighty questions, for earnest consideration of whether they truly desired to know the answers, and for mentally preparing themselves for whatever profound wisdom or formidable challenge Apollo might choose to impart. When their long-awaited turn finally arrived, the suppliants would be permitted to enter the inner sanctum of the temple, a deeply recessed chamber within the edifice where access was strictly forbidden to all but a privileged few mortals. There, positioned upon a three-legged tripod situated directly over a chasm in the earth, from which mysterious, ethereal vapors were said to emanate, the Pythia would gradually enter into a profound, trance-like state and commence to articulate the sacred words that Apollo divinely bestowed upon her. However, it is precisely at this juncture that the narrative acquires particular fascination for those among us who possess an appreciation for the subtle intricacies of effective communication. The Pythia's pronouncements frequently emerged as cryptic fragments, enigmatic phrases, or deeply symbolic images that necessitated meticulous and discerning interpretation. The dedicated priests of Apollo functioned as crucial intermediaries, diligently listening to her often obscure utterances and subsequently translating them into the more formal, comprehensible responses that visitors would then carry home with them. These oracular pronouncements were renowned throughout the ancient world for their inherent ambiguity. When King Croesus of Lydia, for instance, inquired whether he should launch an assault against Persia, the oracle famously declared that if he crossed the river separating the two kingdoms, he would assuredly destroy a great empire. Croesus, with misplaced confidence, presumed this prophecy unequivocally signified the destruction of the Persian Empire. Yet, when he was decisively vanquished in battle, he grimly realized that the great empire that had been utterly destroyed was, in fact, his own. The oracle had indeed spoken truth, but it was a truth deliberately crafted to be understood in more than a singular, straightforward manner. This inherent ambiguity, far from being a flaw within the meticulously designed oracular system, was, on the contrary, a deliberate and fundamental feature. The responses emanating from Delphi were specifically engineered to compel individuals to engage in more profound introspection concerning their initial questions and the underlying assumptions guiding them. They effectively obliged visitors to contemplate a multitude of potential outcomes, to rigorously scrutinize their own motivations and ingrained expectations, and to adequately prepare themselves for eventualities they had not initially considered. The oracle, therefore, did not merely furnish straightforward answers. It thoughtfully provided a sophisticated framework for formulating more insightful and pertinent questions. Yet perhaps the most profoundly impactful oracular responses were those that manifested as absolute silence. On occasion, despite the meticulous execution of all the prescribed rituals and extensive preparations, despite the arduous, weeks-long journey and the generous offerings presented, the Pythia would simply remain seated quietly upon her tripod, uttering no words whatsoever. This profound silence was never construed as a failure of the oracle or as an indication that Apollo was absent. Rather, it was interpreted as a distinct form of divine communication, one that was considered exceptionally worthy of deep and sustained contemplation. What indeed could such a silence signify as a response to a desperate, urgent question? Sometimes it conveyed that the question itself was inappropriate or ill-conceived, indicating that the inquirer was attempting to evade personal responsibility for a decision that rightfully belonged to them alone. At other times, it suggested that the timing was not yet propitious, implying that greater life experience or deeper inner wisdom was prerequisite before any answer could become truly meaningful. Occasionally, it simply implied that the very act of undertaking the pilgrimage and posing the question held greater significance than the reception of any specific, explicit response. The visitors who departed Delphi, having received silence as their answer, frequently discovered it to be more challenging and ultimately more profoundly valuable than those who had been granted clear, unequivocal prophecies. They were compelled to return to their homes with nothing but the lingering echo of their own unanswered questions, forced to live with an unsettling degree of uncertainty and to independently forge their own paths forward. Many subsequently reported that this enigmatic silence gradually transformed into a form of answer in itself, serving as a profound teaching about the inherent limitations of human knowledge and the paramount importance of cultivating a robust inner wisdom. The priests of Delphi recognized that individuals arrived at the sacred site, yearning for absolute assurances amidst life's inherent unpredictability, seeking unwavering promises concerning tomorrow which even the most revered deities were incapable of bestowing. The pronouncements emanating from the sacred precinct, whether articulated verbally or conveyed through profound silence, were meticulously crafted to foster within each supplicant an altered perspective towards the unknown. The objective was not to eradicate the presence of the unpredictable, but rather to cultivate the fortitude required to advance resolutely, undeterred by its pervasive presence. An profound sense of solace pervades the contemplation of Delphi's daily regimen throughout its many centuries of continuous activity. Each dawn, the consecrated priests diligently executed the intricate rites essential for preserving the sanctity and spiritual integrity of the holy precinct. Concurrently, the Paithia, the revered priestess, embarked upon a regimen of profound prayer and rigorous purification, attuning herself to the divine influx. Meanwhile, in the expansive courtyard, an assembly of expectant visitors would convene, engaging in earnest discourse, confiding their deepest aspirations and most troubling anxieties with fellow sojourners who had journeyed from myriad distant territories. This entire collective was bound by a shared realization. Certain inquiries possessed a gravity and profundity that precluded any facile or immediate resolution. For more than a millennium, the oracle at Delphi diligently functioned, dispensing invaluable counsel to both private citizens and entire city-states across the expanse of the classical era. The reach of its sagacity transcended mere theological matters, permeating the realms of statecraft, intellectual inquiry, and the quotidian existence of the populace. The profound aphorism, Gnothi Sioton, or Know Thyself, was prominently carved into the very fabric of the temple's edifice, serving as an enduring admonition to every supplicant that the genesis of true and paramount wisdom lies in the arduous yet indispensable process of sincere introspection. In the fullness of time, concomitant with the sweeping transformations of the ancient world and the advent of burgeoning spiritual doctrines, a diminishing number of adherents undertook the sacred journey to Delphi. The final documented pronouncement from the oracle was issued in the 4th century of the Common Era. Subsequent to this epical event, the hallowed temple gradually succumbed to an enveloping quietude. This was not the profound, resonant stillness indicative of a celestial communication, but rather the desolate, hollow quietude of desertion. The era in which divine entities directly communicated with humanity via designated emissaries was drawing to its inexorable close. Nevertheless, the timeless precepts imparted by Delphi retain their profound pertinence for all individuals who have contended with arduous choices or yearned for more lucid directives concerning their forthcoming path. The hallowed oracle instructed that genuine sagacity emanates not from possessing a complete compendium of solutions, but rather from cultivating the discernment to formulate more insightful inquiries. Furthermore, it posited that the state of uncertainty should not be perceived as an impediment requiring resolution, but rather as an existential condition to be accepted with both valor and modesty. And perhaps of paramount significance, Delphi evinced that on occasion, the most penetrating insights manifest not as articulate pronouncements, but as a deep, resonant stillness. These are moments of contemplative quietude, where one can discern the nascent stirrings of personal intuition, sanctuaries where individuals can cultivate self-reliance in navigating complex choices, even in the absence of absolute foresight regarding their ultimate consequences. As one gradually succumbs to the gentle embrace of slumber, there arises an opportunity to contemplate the inherent worth of those serene intervals when the incessant querying ceases, allowing for a profound attunement to the innate wisdom residing within the deepest recesses of one's being, concerning the imperative actions that lie ahead. Recalling the Delphic oracle's profound instruction that the most penetrating wisdom occasionally stems from an acquiescence to the boundaries of human knowledge and control, there exists, moreover, a distinct narrative elucidating the concept of acceptance and the inherent constraints of even extraordinary human might. Even when such power surpasses any capacity ever manifested by a mere mortal. This account chronicles the saga of Heracles, the most formidable individual to have ever walked the earth, and his transformative realization that certain formidable encumbrances remain immovable, irrespective of one's colossal potency. Heracles entered the world endowed with prodigious endowments that initially appeared to be unmitigated boons, yet ultimately proved to be as much a bane as a benefaction. His physical prowess was, in the truest sense, beyond the scope of human capability. Even in his infancy, he exhibited astounding power, effortlessly strangling venomous serpents with his unclad hands. In his burgeoning youth, he possessed the capacity to displace colossal rocks that would ordinarily necessitate the combined efforts of multiple teams of oxen to dislodge. However, this unparalleled might was inextricably coupled with a temperament of commensurate ferocity. This potent amalgamation of attributes was destined to culminate in profound catastrophe. The pivotal occurrence that irrevocably altered the trajectory of his existence transpired during an episode of divinely induced frenzy, orchestrated by Hera, who harbored an eternal resentment towards Zeus for his marital transgressions with Heracles' mortal progenitor. During this transient period of mental derangement, Heracles tragically slew his beloved wife and offspring, the very individuals and dearest to his heart in all the cosmos. Upon the dissipation of the affliction and his horrifying comprehension of his heinous deeds, the ensuing anguish threatened to utterly consume his very being. Consumed by an overwhelming desperation to find a means of expiating his grievous transgressions, Heracles journeyed to the sacred precinct of Delphi, seeking the divine counsel of its venerable oracle. The Pythia, in her prophetic utterance, revealed that he was enjoined to indenture himself to his kinsman, Eurystheus, the craven monarch of Tyrants, for a period of 12 years, undertaking whatever arduous tasks Eurystheus might impose upon him. It was stipulated that solely through the successful completion of this arduous atonement could he harbor any prospect of purifying his soul from the corrosive burden of guilt that was relentlessly devouring him from within. Eurystheus, acutely aware of Heracles' formidable might and harboring profound apprehension that his potent kinsman might, in due course, lay claim to his regal authority, resolved to prescribe a series of undertakings that were, by their very nature, insurmountable for any ordinary human. His malevolent aspiration was for Heracles to perish in the execution of these endeavors, thereby eliminating a political rival whilst maintaining the facade of providing a route to spiritual absolution. What eluded Eurystheus's comprehension, however, was that Heracles' fervent compulsion to expiate his transgressions surpassed even his fabled corporeal prowess. The initial undertaking appeared deceptively uncomplicated: the eradication of the Nemean lion, a savage creature that had long been inflicting widespread terror upon the pastoral regions surrounding the polis of Nemea. While lions were undeniably perilous adversaries, Heracles had previously confronted and vanquished formidable beasts. His subsequent revelation, upon meticulously tracking the creature to its secluded den, was that this was by no means an archetypal leonine predator. Its formidable pelt rendered it invulnerable to conventional armaments. Its razor-sharp talons were capable of rending even the most robust armor, and its thunderous roar possessed the terrifying capacity to immobilize seasoned warriors with sheer dread. Through a succession of arduous and often agonizing attempts and failures, Heracles progressively grasped the futility of employing standard weaponry against the formidable beast. His volleys of arrows merely ricocheted harmlessly, from its impenetrable hide. His tempered blade failed to pierce its resilient dermis. His stout spear splintered upon impact with its unyielding cranium. Yet Heracles possessed an attribute more precious than any forged armament, an enduring patience forged in the crucible of utter desperation, coupled with an innate readiness to fundamentally alter his strategy when conventional tactics proved demonstrably ineffective. Ultimately, he arrived at the crucial realization that if inflicting harm upon the lion with external implements was impossible, he must perforce resort to his unadorned hands and his inherent, unparalleled physical might. Within the confines of its very lair, he engaged the creature in a titanic struggle, employing his formidable limbs to slowly constrict the breath from its body in an agonizing contest that endured for several hours. Once the beast was finally vanquished, he ingeniously utilized its own adamantine claws to meticulously flay its hide, thereby fashioning for himself an invulnerable garment that would serve as crucial protection in his subsequent trials. Upon Heracles' triumphal re-entry into Tiryns, bearing the colossal cadaver of the Nemean lion, King Eurystheus was seized by such profound terror that he sought refuge within a massive bronze urn, subsequently issuing all future directives from the ostensible sanctuary of the royal palace's inner sanctum. Yet, far from being demoralized by Heracles' unexpected triumph, Eurystheus' resolve only hardened, impelling him to devise even more formidable assignments designed to conclusively vanquish his seemingly indomitable kinsman. The ensuing 12 monumental undertakings were each meticulously conceived to leverage a distinct dimension of the unattainable. Certain challenges, such as the extermination of the monstrous 9-headed Lernaean hydra, which regenerated 2 heads for every one severed, demanded not merely immense physical power, but also considerable strategic acumen and ingenuity. Conversely, other tasks, exemplified by the cleansing of the Augean stables, which contained thousands of bovine creatures and had remained unswept for many decades, presented a sheer magnitude of scale that rendered them ostensibly beyond the capacity of any single person to complete within the prescribed time frame. Nevertheless, Heracles confronted each seemingly insuperable assignment with the identical meticulous resolve and unwavering tenacity that had enabled his triumph over the Nemean lion. In instances where sheer physical might proved insufficient, he judiciously deployed his keen intellect. When intellectual prowess alone was inadequate, he did not hesitate to solicit assistance from external sources. When a particular undertaking appeared to transcend the capabilities of a solitary individual, he ingeniously devised methods to radically alter the scope of his methodology, such as ingeniously rerouting mighty rivers to thoroughly cleanse the Augean stables within the span of a single solar cycle. With every successive labor, Heracles assimilated novel insights into the fundamental character of seemingly insoluble predicaments. He discovered that certain challenges defied resolution through direct, head-on confrontation, instead necessitating nuanced, circuitous strategies. Other tasks proved insurmountable in isolation, demanding collaborative efforts with individuals endowed with synergistic abilities. Furthermore, some objectives could not be expedited, instead demanding unwavering patience and sustained perseverance across protracted durations. Intriguingly, the most profoundly demanding of his labors were not invariably those that demanded the greatest exertion of sheer physical power. For instance, the capture of the Ceryneian hind, a hallowed servine creature consecrated to the goddess Artemis, necessitated that he meticulously pursue the animal for a full calendar year without inflicting any injury upon it. This prolonged pursuit instilled within him an unprecedented sense of patience and a profound reverence for the divine, virtues that his immense physical capabilities had never previously compelled him to cultivate. The quest to retrieve the resplendent golden apples from the mythical garden of the Hesperides compelled him to momentarily assume the monumental burden of supporting the celestial sphere from the venerable Titan, Atlas. During this fleeting interlude, Heracles quite literally bore the immense burden of the cosmos upon his shoulders, thereby internalizing the profound significance of assuming accountability not merely for his personal conduct, but for the collective well-being of all existent things. The culminating labor, the retrieval of Cerberus, the fearsome three-headed guardian hound of the netherworld, and his conveyance to the terrestrial plane, necessitated a perilous descent into the spectral dominion of the deceased, thereby forcing him to confront his own inherent mortality. Within the abyssal gloom of Hades, encircled by the ethereal specters of the departed, Heracles was compelled to grapple with the stark realization that even his extraordinary might was ultimately finite, and that he too would one day inevitably join the innumerable phantoms drifting through the somber shadows. Upon the definitive conclusion of the 12 formidable labors, Heracles had undergone a profound metamorphosis, a transformation extending far beyond the confines of mere corporeal enhancement. He had acquired the virtue of humility through confronting assignments that brought him to the very precipice of vanquishment. He had cultivated an enduring patience through protracted periods of systematic exertion. He had assimilated the indispensable art of collaboration through the necessity of soliciting aid from both celestial beings and terrestrial mortals. Of paramount significance, he had internalized the crucial axiom that unbridled strength, devoid of sagacious discernment, frequently poses a greater peril than inherent feebleness. Yet perhaps the most profound revelation that dawned upon him stemmed from the stark realization that the successful completion of his arduous labors did not, in fact, resolve the deeper, more intrinsic problem that had initially compelled him to undertake them. The crushing weight of guilt and the profound sorrow over the tragic demise of his cherished family did not magically dissipate upon the conclusion of his final, monumental task. The sheer magnitude of his achievements utterly failed to resurrect his loved ones, or to expunge the terrible, irreversible actions he had committed in the throes of his temporary madness. What these legendary trials bestowed upon Heracles instead was a wisdom far more subtle, yet infinitely more enduring. The profound understanding that genuine redemption is not born from a singular, grand, heroic deed, but rather emerges from the daily, deliberate choice to dedicate whatever unique talents and strengths one possesses to the betterment of others, rather than solely to one's own self-aggrandizement. Heracles, the mightiest mortal, came to comprehend that being the most physically powerful individual in the world held very little intrinsic value unless that formidable strength was purposefully wielded to safeguard and protect those who were utterly incapable of defending themselves. Following the arduous completion of his 12 labors, Heracles continued to embark upon numerous thrilling adventures and to confront a myriad of formidable challenges. However, a significant and palpable shift marked his approach to these new trials. He exhibited a newfound readiness to solicit assistance when circumstances warranted it, displayed a far greater reluctance to resort to immediate violence when alternative, more diplomatic solutions might prevail, and demonstrated a more profound thoughtfulness regarding the far-reaching consequences of his every action. He had, through bitter experience, assimilated the crucial lesson that true, enduring strength emanates not from one's capacity for destruction, but rather from the inherent ability to construct, to nurture, and to diligently protect. The timeless narrative of Heracles and his monumental labors serves as a poignant reminder to all of humanity that every individual, irrespective of their innate gifts or immense power, is ultimately tasked with discovering their unique method of coexisting with the errors they have made and the profound pain they may have inadvertently inflicted. There exists no undertaking so grand, no feat so extraordinary, that its accomplishment can definitively erase the indelible imprints of the past. No achievement, however awe-inspiring, possesses the power to silence the persistent, often relentless voice of one's own conscience. Yet, within Heracles' compelling saga, there also resides an undeniable beacon of hope. This hope springs from the crucial understanding that we possess the inherent capacity to choose how we respond to our inevitable failures and inherent limitations. We can permit them to utterly crush our spirit, or we can, conversely, allow them to serve as invaluable teachers. We can, if we so choose, employ our guilt as a convenient pretext for prolonged inaction, or we can harness it as a potent, transformative motivation to evolve into individuals far superior to our former selves. As our minds gently drift towards the embrace of slumber, perhaps we can cultivate a deeper appreciation for both the inherent burden and the extraordinary gift of being human, inherently flawed and perpetually limited, yet simultaneously capable of remarkable growth, profound learning, and the pursuit of redemption through unwavering, persistent effort and a genuine, heartfelt concern for the welfare of others. You recall how Heracles, through his trials, learned that even the most immense strength possesses its intrinsic limits, and that certain burdens are destined to be carried with fortitude rather than merely lifted away. Well, there remains one more profound story to impart before we permit the gentle currents of sleep to carry us into oblivion. This is a narrative concerning the ultimate, unyielding limits that govern the entirety of mortal existence, and the three ancient sisters who, from the very dawn of time, meticulously measured out the precise length of every single human story ever told. The Moirai, revered in Latin as the Fates, were beings of unimaginable antiquity, predating even the mighty Olympian gods, older, indeed, than Zeus himself. Their existence commenced from the absolute beginning of creation, from the primordial moment when the cosmos first began to separate its ordered form from the swirling chaos, and, with an unwavering certainty, they would continue to exist until the very culmination of all things. Their individual names were Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, and collectively, they held dominion over a power so absolute that not even the most formidable deities could ever hope to override it. The precise, predetermined span of every single mortal life. Clotho was revered as the spinner. She sat perpetually at her ancient wheel within a secluded chamber that existed entirely outside the normal confines of temporal perception and spatial dimensions, meticulously drawing out the delicate threads that would eventually coalesce into the intricate tapestries of human lives. Each individual thread was utterly unique in its composition, Some were robust and remarkably strong, others exquisitely fine and exceptionally delicate. Some shimmered with brilliant, vibrant colors, while others presented a more subdued and muted palette. The inherent thickness, texture, and specific coloration of each thread would, in turn, irrevocably determine the fundamental character and the latent potential of the distinct life it symbolically represented. Lachesis was known as the measurer. With solemn precision, she took the nascent threads that Clotho had painstakingly spun, and with an unerring hand, determined their precise length, thereby dictating how long each individual life would endure, and how many years would ultimately be allotted to each person. Some threads she measured to an extraordinary length, meticulously stretching them out to signify lives that would gracefully span many decades. Others she kept remarkably short, thereby marking lives that, though destined to burn with an intense, brilliant flame, would do so for a tragically brief duration. Her pronouncements were absolute and final, entirely beyond the possibility of appeal or alteration. Atropos held the chilling yet necessary role of the cutter. When the appointed, inevitable moment arrived for each life to reach its conclusion, she would purposefully take up her formidable shears and, with unwavering resolve, sever the thread, thereby irrevocably separating the connection between the soul and the physical body. Her cuts were invariably clean and executed with absolute precision, performed entirely without malice or the slightest hesitation. She understood, with profound clarity, that death was not a punitive measure, but rather an indispensable component of the cyclical process that graciously made room for the emergence of new life. The sacred chamber where these three formidable sisters diligently performed their eternal work was unlike any other location in the entire universe. It resonated with the soft, hypnotic hum of Clotho's spinning wheel, the gentle, almost imperceptible murmur of Lachesis as she meticulously counted out her measures, and the quiet, definitive snip of Atropos's shears. The walls of this hallowed space were meticulously lined with countless shelves, each laden with an innumerable array of threads in every conceivable stage of completion. Some were still in the process of being spun, others had been measured but not yet severed, and still others had already been cut and neatly wound into compact, organized bundles. What rendered the Moirai so extraordinarily powerful, and consequently so deeply feared even by the Olympian gods themselves, was the undeniable fact that their decisions applied to every single being without the slightest exception. Kings and humble peasants, valiant heroes and cowering cowards, powerful gods and mortal men, all were unequivocally subject to the intricate threads that the sisters meticulously spun, precisely measured, and ultimately severed. Zeus might command the vast expanse of the sky, and Poseidon might hold dominion over the boundless seas, but even these titanic deities were utterly powerless to extend the life of a mortal whose thread had been definitively cut by the unyielding hand of Atropos. There existed numerous tales of valiant heroes who, in their desperation, attempted to bargain with the implacable fates, offering immense treasures or performing mighty, legendary deeds in exchange for extended lifespans for themselves or their beloved kin. However, the Moirai remained utterly incorruptible. They steadfastly refused to accept any form of bribe, never exhibited favoritism, and never, under any circumstances, made exceptions to their immutable decrees. Their monumental work was far too critical and sacred to be swayed or influenced by personal entreaties or emotional pleas, no matter how fervent. This unyielding stance might, to some, appear cold or even cruel. Yet the ancient Greeks possessed a profound understanding that the fates' absolute inflexibility was, in essence, a manifestation of a higher form of cosmic justice. If the Moirai could be swayed by negotiation or intimidated by threats, then the wealthy and the powerful would undoubtedly live forever, while the impoverished and the weak would invariably perish prematurely. The unchangeable, immutable nature of fate therefore ensured that everyone, entirely irrespective of their social status or influential connections, possessed an equal claim to the life they had been divinely bestowed. The fates also imparted a profoundly important lesson concerning the critical distinction between the sheer length of a life and its intrinsic value. A thread that was cut short was not by any measure inherently less valuable than one that had been measured to a prodigious length. Indeed, some of the most meaningful and profoundly influential lives chronicled in Greek mythology belonged to heroes whose threads, though bright, were tragically brief. These were individuals who accomplished truly extraordinary feats and left an indelible mark upon the world within the limited temporal span they were graciously afforded. What truly mattered, then, was not the sheer duration of the thread, but rather what was intricately woven with it during the precious time it was permitted to last. Some individuals utilized their allotted years to create unparalleled beauty, to selflessly assist others, to diligently learn and grow, and to contribute meaningfully to the world that encompassed them. Others, regrettably, squandered their invaluable time in acts of selfishness or cruelty, or through a simple, profound inattention to the precious and ephemeral nature of the gift they had been so generously given. Furthermore, the Moirai bore the solemn responsibility for meticulously maintaining the delicate balance between the continuous cycle of birth and death, a crucial equilibrium that prevented the world from becoming overpopulated with an endless multitude of immortal beings. Every single thread that was definitively cut by Atropos simultaneously created a vacant space for a new thread to be meticulously spun by Clotho. Death, therefore, was not perceived as an absolute ending, but rather as a profound transformation, an indispensable component of the grand cosmic cycle that ensured life remained in perpetual motion, constantly evolving and continually renewing itself. Within their timeless chamber, situated beyond the reach of conventional chronology, the three sisters possessed the unique ability to discern the intricate patterns that individual lives collectively created when woven together. They comprehended, with unparalleled clarity, how each person's unique thread interconnected with countless others, how lives subtly influenced, steadfastly supported, and provocatively challenged each other in ways that the individuals themselves might never fully grasp. They witnessed, with an all-encompassing vision, the magnificent tapestry of human experience being meticulously crafted, one delicate thread at a time. Perhaps the most profound and awe-inspiring aspect of the Moirai's monumental work was their unwavering respect for the inherent agency of the mortals whose fates they meticulously controlled. While they irrevocably determined when each life would commence and when it would ultimately conclude, they did not dictate how that life would be lived in the intervening period. Within the predetermined span of years they so precisely allotted, each person remained entirely free to make their own choices, to embrace change and personal growth, to forge meaning and purpose according to their individual values and deepest desires. This crucial distinction implied that fate and free will were not diametrically opposed concepts, but rather intertwined partners in the grand dance of existence. The fates meticulously provided the fundamental framework within which human choice could actively operate. This encompassed the basic circumstances of birth, the predetermined length of life, and the major, unavoidable events that would inevitably shape each person's unique path. However, within that overarching framework, there existed an enormous, expansive room for individual decision-making and profound personal responsibility. The ancient Greeks derived immense comfort from this sophisticated understanding of fate. It provided them with the solace that while they could not control every single event that transpired in their lives, they possessed the undeniable power to control how they chose to respond to those events. They could not, for instance, choose the precise length of their threads, but they could absolutely choose what to do with the precious time they were so generously given. They could not evade the ultimate inevitability of death, but they could consciously choose to live in ways that would be cherished, remembered, and honored long after their threads had been finally severed. There is something inherently deeply peaceful about contemplating the Moirai engaged in their eternal, ceaseless work, surrounded by the countless threads that exquisitely represent the entirety of human experience. They are never hurried or anxious, never consumed by anger or driven by vindictiveness. They simply execute what precisely needs to be done, day after day, century after century, with the profound patience and meticulous care that such immensely important work unequivocally merits. In some ancient renditions of their story, the three sisters would occasionally pause their diligent labor to carefully examine a particularly intriguing thread or to quietly admire the intricate, evolving pattern that was gradually emerging within the magnificent, overarching tapestry of human life. They derived profound satisfaction from their work, not because it bestowed upon them unbridled power over others, but rather because it contributed intrinsically to something far grander and infinitely more beautiful than any single individual life could ever hope to create in isolation. As this exploration of ancient narratives concludes, one might embrace a unique serenity found within the enduring imagery of the Moirai and their intricate threads of fate. The exact length of an individual's personal thread remains an inscrutable mystery, and the precise moment when Atropos will grasp her formidable shears to sever it cannot be foretold. Nevertheless, humanity possesses the profound capacity to consciously choose the substance and quality woven into the finite span of time granted. One can endeavor to create threads that impart strength to the surrounding tapestry, enriching the grand pattern of human experience with beauty and profound significance. It becomes a responsibility to live in ways that honor the precious endowment of consciousness and the freedom of choice inherent in each individual's strand. Consequently, when the predestined time arrives for a thread to be cut, there can be an abiding trust that it has contributed to something far more expansive and lasting than the self alone. Individuals may find solace in the contemplation that their particular thread forms an indispensable segment of a cosmic pattern, one of such immense scale and exquisite beauty that its entirety eludes human comprehension. Nevertheless, the integrity and perpetual expansion of this grand design are utterly reliant upon the strength and contribution of every solitary strand. The advent of a new day invariably presents fresh opportunities for making decisions, offering renewed prospects to meticulously interweave elements of profound significance into the invaluable span of time bestowed upon each being. Thus, a period of repose is warranted, allowing one's nocturnal visions to be permeated by the serene contentment derived from accomplishments already achieved, coupled with the subtle, encouraging anticipation of endeavors that lie ahead.